Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei was guardian of all girls in DxD and harem? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the DanzyDanz for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. A figure to look up to and an inspiration to all with modest background. A simple boy raised in a simple and loving family, who climbed his way through ranks of adventurers through hard work and sheer will. From a mere rookie barely able to fend himself with a short sword, taking small quests from his fellow small folk, to a worldwide renowned legend who was bestowed a sacred gear, a gift from the gods. Respected by fellow experienced adventurers, idolized by kids and fledgling adventurers who had just picked up their swords, dreamt by girls ranging from a common house servant to a princess of a rich country. He was brave. Very brave. But he was not stupid. His mind wasn't as sharp as the Grand Magus, Mephistopheles, but to claim issei hiatus was all bronze and no brains would be downright mistaken. Should a battle be no longer winnable, completely devoid of hope, he will sound the retreat and live to fight another day, crushing those who failed to slay him. There is a fine line between bravery and stupidity. Issei knew so. Not rarely an honorable knight, or anyone self-righteous enough to see themselves as one, called him a coward. He didn't particularly mind. He still lived while those honor-crazed had become no more than reanimated rotting corpses deep in the dungeon, forever cursed to guard the rumored endless treasures until another adventurer come and lay them to a final rest. The dungeon, unlike most other dungeons, this one had no name. No fancy two words mixed into one for a name. Not the Blackwood dungeon, not the ever-fallen dungeon, not the dungeon of doom, only the dungeon. A place filled with living horrors and monsters that could eradicate an entire city, chock full of traps varying from pitfalls to acid rain, from everyday zombies or goblins that were practically the bread and butter for a party of bronze-ranked adventurers, to a fearsome elemental dragon whose breath could melt a city, and to the feared apocalyptic beast itself, Trihexa, the beast of the apocalypse, harbinger of death, devourer of life, and so on and on. Hundreds had been dispatched into the dungeon. A crusade to quell the prime evil once and for all. Hundreds entered, none returned. The dungeon remained untouched for many years to come, until one day, the wielder of the Red Dragon Emperor himself, the world's champion, the chosen of mankind, lover of breasts, took upon the noble task. Humans, angels, devils, fallen angels, the Norse, the Olympians, and people of various races all supported him and his great party, believing that he was truly the chosen one to finally rid the world of the primeval evil. The human who would put an end to their ceaseless worry of the apocalypse. Many paraded his march into the mouth of the dungeon. Dismissing its grim stench, everyone cheered his name, lauded him, prayed and wished for his success. All girls and women hoped for his well-being, yearning that they would see their adored champion once again. All legendary Orichalcum and Mithra-ranked S and SS rank respectively adventurers followed him to fight alongside him until the last draw of their breath, determined to put the evil beast down once and for all. The people who had never learned how to swing a sword or cast a simple fireball spell remained at the entrance, assembling a massive camp guarded by soldiers of various factions, camping for their hero's triumphant return. They waited and waited. Hours became a day, and days became a week, and weeks became a month. Months became year. Nobody left at the mouth of the dungeon. The heroes never returned. Along with their champion, their hope died. But you're not dead, Issei sighed drearily. He was really into his storytelling too. I know that, but that's how it goes. That's the legend that people believed in. Well, the legend sucks. The young girl with the ardent scarlet hair stuck out her tongue in a display of audacity, aimed at none other than her one and only guardian. Tells something happier, this brat. If he was any younger and heedless, Issei would have expressed himself verbally. An entire year had passed, and she was still equally annoying since the first time they met, or rather, when he killed her last guardian, not a recollection he was fond of. He always frowned when he remembered that day. That day, or maybe night, his belief that he had slain the beast, the prime evil of all things that existed, shattered completely. The idea that he had saved the world was thrown down on his feet and stomped until it was dead. Why? Issei remembered the rasped breath. The beast's enormous figure coated in hot red scales, drenched in his own blood, futilely lying down next to him, miraculously alive. What wrong have I done? Nothing yet. He had told him. Gods, he was such a righteous prick. But I can have you bringing the apocalypse or whatever as you like. Don't know when, don't know why, but I stopped it anyway. He victoriously grinned as the adventurers behind him cheered. It had been a long, torturous fight. They had suffered massively. Around 100 of the strongest adventurers traveled with him from the start. 20 remained when he entered the final chamber to fell Trihexa, and now, only 4 remained including him. 2 mages, a knight, and him. The champion, the apocalypse? Trihexa spoke with confusion. But it was my duty to prevent one. Issei didn't know if a Trihexa could shed a tear. Hell, he doubted nobody ever knew. No one in the 7th hells or the 7th heavens probably knew. But the beast shed a tear. Maybe it was crocodile tears, an attempt to strike his chords, begging for his pity, but regardless of what it was, he did. The fearsome beast of the apocalypse swept by his feet. Don't joke around, he said to the presumed beast. Completely dumbstruck. You're Trihexa, you can't. Trihexa? The ancient being looked painfully confused. Boy, that vile beast was long gone decades ago, slain by Yahweh and other gods. Its soul is kept in that stone. Idly, he turned around to see the center of the large cave. There lied a small podium, and floating atop of it was a black gemstone. It was such a small orb, not bigger than a loaf of bread. The soul stone, he had said to him. My whole life devoted to guard that wretched stone, protected that girl, so the beast shall never rise. It was my sole purpose of being, and I am slain due to your lack of understanding? Issei remembered his resolve faltering at that. Oh, it was faltering quick. As quick as ice in summer heat. It felt like it just dropped into a gaping pit, never to be recovered. Through his life, he had learned who to believe and who to pretend to believe in. Issei hoped the big dragon would fall into the latter, but he trusted him. He remembered his last remaining followers weren't listening. They were shouting at him, yelling that the Trihexa was only tricking him. But Trihexa, he silenced them with a glare. Fools! What benefit do I gain by lying? I'm dying regardless what I say. His entire body was covered in slashes. Some were burnt, horribly. Huge chunk of flesh was missing on his torso, blown out by the champion's explosion. The long horn at the edge of his snout was broken and his yellow eyes were losing their light. Who sent you here, boy? What cruel, vindictive soul told you those lies? Issei recalled seeing the pain in his eyes as he told him everything. That all factions on Earth had cooperated to kill him, when all he had done was to prevent their demise, mistaking every adventurer as enemy as they mistook him as the prime evil. It must have been one hell of an unpleasant feeling, being labeled the prime evil, despised by everyone because of some baseless lies, and now dying without receiving a gratitude for his deeds in protecting the world's existence. He remembered feeling ridden by guilt. Felt like an idiot. The glorified puppet champion of mankind. Perhaps if he had waited. If he told his party to stay first before instantly attacking him, unleashing torrents of spells and their various weapon techniques, perhaps all of this misunderstanding could be avoided. Their death would be avoided. Great Red's death would be avoided. You mulling again, partner? Gah! Behind him, his last remaining companion snorted a puff of air that lifted him off his rock seat. Issei landed on the red dirt with an audible oof. Fuck sake drag, how many times do I have to tell you? It's not funny. Land is flat and flat hurts my ass. Why Dre Gotch? The Red Dragon Emperor himself. He was only about a half of his real size, but all of his features were the same, only downscaled. The same brilliant crimson scale, same draconic emerald green eyes, and the very same annoying guttural laughter. Just smaller and not as noisy, still not less annoying. He must had exited his soul when he was being gloomy. Drakey. Triss leapt into the sky with a gust of her misty black wings. Wings he had never seen before in his life, until he met her. He still had no idea what the girl containing a part of the beast's soul had for wings, or if it was ever named or discovered before. He wondered if they're called Trihexanin. Trihexan, perhaps? Features of a dragon were referred to as draconic, so maybe trihexanic? He had zero clue. He just knew it looked ghostly. More like wispy tendrils rather than wings. He watched her red hair fluttered as she gently landed on Drake's scaly forehead, as she then ranted about how boring his story was just to miff him. Normally Issei would bicker back at her. But he didn't this time. Too busy brooding at the moment as Great Red's withering voice echoed. My watch has ended, boy. You're unlike any of these fools you listen. Maybe Issei was too disordered at the time, but he believed the dragon smiled at him. Swear to this old dragon that you will protect her. Her and the soulstone, but her most importantly, else the whole world is doomed. Protect her? Who are you talking about? His serpent-like yellow eyes trailed to a small cavern. Trihexa's soul is too powerful to be completely destroyed and too powerful to be contained in one soulstone. There's more? 6 of them in here is one. The red dragon coughed, spewing an excessive amount of blood from his huge maw. Oni's well as the only seal if she dies, and those soulstones have been gathered, Trihexa will rise. Issei stole a subtle glance at Triss. She wasn't much different than she was back then. He recalled seeing her peering from her hiding place, hiding behind a wall of red rock, visibly terrified. Her hands were shivering and her body trembled as tears dripped down the tip of her chin. Her scarlet red hair was noticeable even in the dark cavern. At first, no one noticed her. They were still cheering without him, but Motohama, he saw her, never missed a spot, that glassed magus. He saw her and roused the rest of the party to attack her. A girl who had done nothing. He remembered clearly that the red dragon tried to stop them. He tried firing a classic dragonic fire breath, only to let out his blood and hacked pitifully. It was a difficult moment with so little time. He tried stopping them, reasoning with them, yelled an order. He had done everything to give him some more time. Are you crazy? We've gone this far and you're going to turn on us. Which side are you on? That beast or us? Your friends? Instead they branded him a traitor. His own best friend by all people. Gods, it was difficult hearing them scream. Especially when it was him who ripped their scream off their throat. He didn't kill them right then, he couldn't. They had descended floors and floors. Brotherly bonds had been made, they had lost brothers and sisters in their journey. They had won and laughed. They had lost and wept, and now he had to fight them at the very end. He was given a choice. Return to his old life without ever looking back to this day, or prevent the apocalypse. That time, the world's champion knew there would be no turning back whichever choice he made. They were equally exhausted, and if it wasn't for Draeg's minor regeneration ability, he might have been the one who died. But he lived. Issei lived and executed those who had been his followers since the first step he took towards the dungeon with his very hands. His crimson armor protected him from Motohama's flame spell that had turned people to cinders, and his armor allowed him to catch Matsuda's sword, gripping it tight as he plunged his sword through the knight's chest. Come on, man, let's just get this over with. We've won, I see. Why are we still fighting? Just end it. I'll forget everything that has happened here. Just look at that beast. He's dying. You can't save him. You just have to kill her, and we'll head outside. We'll be heroes and get our rewards. The ladies are waiting, I see. He could never forget Matsuda's disappointed smile when he stabbed his heart with Ascalon. It had to be done. No one there believed in the red dragon but him. Letting anyone live meant immunity waiting to happen. He didn't have time to grieve. Rather, he didn't give himself the time. Triss was staring at him that time, half shocked and disbelief, half confusion as she tried to grasp his actions. Him and 3 others must have been the few ones who had managed to get to the deepest floor of the dungeon. She looked like a child witnessing a murder, like an innocent soul discovering that evil exists in the world for the first time, that the world she thought she knew wasn't a beautiful place without taint, all while her only father figure was dying in front of her. Issei recalled, he was going to speak to her, to offer solace, but the girl retreated inside her cave. He could hear quiet sobbing as he headed back to the red dragon, and Issei was filled with nothing but remorse and fury. Alright, big guy. I just killed my friends. My 2 best fucking friends. He spat. His rage was hardly constrained. If Ascalon was any ordinary sword, its hilt would have been crushed under his grip. You better not lie or I'll fucking skin you and her alive, starting with the girl. It was probably the first time he realized the champion of mankind was not the ideal hero who never cursed or made cruel threats. But the dragon still nodded. I swear. A dragon never break his words. I thank you, Red Dragon Emperor. Issei was seething his teeth. Issei. My name's Issei. Hiatus Issei. Hiatus Issei, ah, Japan-born land of the rising sun. Very well, Hiatus Issei. I, Great Red, will be eternally grateful for your devotion and dreadfully regretful for your losses. He could imagine Draeg stumbling on his feet. Great Red? I, Great Red, grinned ironically as he rested his eyes. Not so great now, am I? He then chuckled. The chuckle was so weak that he barely heard it. In here at the end of my time I pass my duty to you, issei. Then Great Red died. Burying his body was a great hassle, but Drake never once complained having to dig the earth with his claws. He had to transform into his true form to push Great Red to the grave, and spent few more minutes burying him. Even so, he never once complained. The dragon was an admirer of Great Red, so he said, and it was the first time Issei saw him cry too. He didn't know dragons could cry until that day, where 2 dragons cried in front of him. The funeral was, well, depressing. Nearly the entire resident of the dungeon came by, minus the zombies since they couldn't think of anything but brains, and most minor monsters at the top floors such as goblins and the slimes. Even the father of wolves, Fener, was present. It was then he realized they knew. The monsters knew about Great Red and knew he was simply doing his duty. They were there to serve under him. This cavern had never been so filled and hot. There must have been at least 50 fire spirits crying tears of flame. Several low-tier dragons breathed fire in honor of the Great One. One thing he realized was that they didn't attack him. They all bowed to him as if he was some sort of their god, groveling in a way their body could. Some god I am murdering their friends and family. It wasn't until Fener himself approached him and spoke to him without moving his mouth. You, issei hiatus, is the last guardian, keeper of the dungeon, this world's last bastion of hope. We will serve you until the end of our time, until the end of our time. The legion of monsters followed as if it was a chant. Dragons, wolves, minotaurs, centaurs, all the oars. All the pixies. All the black skeletons and black orcs. All the elementals and succubi. There was no animosity towards him. They bore no grudge for their fallen companions he had slain. They cared not that they had to kneel to a human who had believed in false truth. To think monsters could do more than what humans could, he was pretty sure all of his hackles rose, just like they did just now. Ending his recollection, the former champion sighed deeply as he lied on his back. He was only wearing his tunic, and honestly, he couldn't care if it was dirted. He could get a new one sooner or later, and it seemed it would be sooner rather than later as a pillar of white light appeared at the edge of his vision. A big bad wolf with grayish-blue mane materialized, and faint haze-like mists coated his furs. Fener. Issei acknowledged his arrival as he got up to his feet, dusting off the dust off his clothes and his brown hair. He had cut off the 2 short locks of hair sticking out behind his head. A goblin once yanked one of them during his earlier days, when he was an inexperienced steel-ranked lowlife. It nearly cost him his life. He had never let his hair touch his shoulders since then. What's up? More rookies? Apparently so. The gray and blue wolf growled. My pack scouted a band with the devil. From her clothes, she seems like a noble. Their dog tags are gold. 6 members. Mostly females. 1 devil and 1 of mixed breed. The rest are humans, gold-ranked and mostly female. Issei grimaced. He hated when having to deal with female adventurers. He had hurt and killed a woman before since they were enemies. He just felt it didn't sit right with him. But what was needed to be done needed to be done. As for the rank, it was the 4th out of 8, from steel, bronze, silver, gold, emerald, platinum, orichalcum, and lastly, mithril. The SS rank for short, where only less than a dozen had ever attained it. His old rank. Without needing to be asked, Fener continued. They've cleared about 10 floors under than 2 hours, taking out at least 100 goblins and skeletons. And they've slain Rieger. Issei couldn't hold back his sigh. A warden gone. The dungeon was becoming weaker and weaker by every ambitious adventurer that walked in. We've secured his body, the wolf assured. The most that could be done to their fallen minotaur was to burn his body. Nonetheless, there will be time for grief. Not now. They're camping at the 11th floor, possibly for half an hour. Could be less. What do you want us to do, boss? A bit weird hearing the word boss from a creature of Norse legend, but Issei got used to it. Get Taurus. He'll be raring to have a go because who wouldn't thrive for revenge when their brother was slain? Tell them to wait for me by the 11th stairs, and tell those guarding the 11th floor to leave them be. They're C-ranked. Brute force can only get so far against a proper party. Right away. As Fener disappeared in a ray of light, Issei grabbed a small pack latched on his belt. After it was taken off, the small pack then expanded to a size of a standard backpack. His hand reached inside, and soon enough, a set of black-tinted armor clanked and tumbled as he carelessly threw them on the ground, still looking for the helmet. The noob-proof armor, as he named. Normally used against those ranked gold and below. It offered decent protection without raising any unneeded suspicions. Meanwhile, Triss had ditched the Crimson Dragon, approaching him with a sullen and worried look on her face. "You're leaving, huh?" Glancing up, issei chuckled. She was a brat, but he knew she cared for him. In her own bratty way. "Yeah," he replied casually, sliding down his feet inside the steel armor, quietly cursing why armor had to be a pain in the ass to wear. "You still have Drake around. Nothing will hurt her, partner." Despite so, Triss was not amused. Her pout didn't fail to form as she clutched his arms, looking at him with her mean red eyes and a small frown. "You're forbidden to die, like I want to." Issei laughed. 5 years ago, he would have been a flustered mess. As a young woman who bore a part of Trihex's soul, Triss was beautiful and not less. A set of crimson eyes with a beastly look, healthily voluptuous, with breathtaking long flowing hair that reminded him of the season of autumn. Even her spiraling horns looked more like a pair of hair ornaments adoring her hair. Had he been any younger and dumber and had the time, he would kill to get a woman like her. Well, perhaps no killing for a girl was a bit extreme. He was her last guardian now. His first priority was her safety. Next? Boobs, probably. Luckily, the succubi were never short on that peculiar area. If not for their services, his sanity might have slipped long ago from having to work without play. Well then, Issei took a deep breath as he wore his full-face helmet, hiding his brown eyes in its shadow. Snow-white light began to gather beneath his feet as he bade his temporary goodbye. "I'll be off. Be good." "There he goes again," Triss sighed melancholically. For a year, nobody had gone past the 10th floor. Her guardian and his wardens had always taken care of them without fail. Still, no matter how many times he had succeeded, no matter if he was the champion of mankind or whatever titles people lauded him, she worried for him. "I could care this much for a person who's slain my father no less, or who I thought was my father, anyway." Without warning, Drake puffed in air, tumbling her down like he did to his partner earlier. Triss was not amused. "Drake, is this the all somber day? You're all keep being somber and such. Isn't this cavern dim enough?" The dragon guffawed, his laughter echoing around the cavern's walls while Triss kept her glare at him. "Either way, he's gone for at least an hour or so. Shall we?" Still on her, but Triss then showed a fearless look as she pushed herself off the ground. "You'll pay for that." Black flames blazed by her palms, flaring chaotic energies. She might be the one to be protected, but she didn't want that. She wanted to be able to protect herself. She had witnessed how powerless she was a year ago, when she could only stare and watch, and she refused to be a damsel in distress like those princesses in Drake's stories. She wanted to be of help. She had only one goal in the pretty head of hers: to be able to fight alongside her guardian. Flames of the campfire danced in her eyes. Its genial warmth embalmed her group of 6, cleansing their fatigue. A moment of respite after their last couple of action-filled, goblin-slashing, skeleton-purifying hours since they had taken the challenge of the dungeon. Rias Gremory had ordered to set camp at a large hallway. Threats will either come from their left or right, which they would be able to see and react accordingly. As her party members rested, several eating the rations, most of them doing nothing but relaxing, Rias idly shifted her head towards the dark corridor lying ahead. As a devil, she could see better in the dark than most races, but in a place where there was no source of light? Her racial gift didn't help much, sadly. She couldn't see far into the abyss cloaking the dungeon, unable to see that one wolf had been sitting in the dark, watching them. Their quest and expedition so far had been no less than satisfactory. 10 floors they had descended with minimal injuries that nothing her healer couldn't handle. Even her holy maiden had gotten used to the miasma of the rotting fleshes and scattered human remains. Goblin skeletons, more bones, is that all this dungeon has now? Grumbling with a frustrated tone would be her party's vanguard, Zenobia Corda, at the moment grouchily poking the campfire with a stick. Where are the elites? The black orcs? The skeleton king? Anything that aren't green-skinned or will crumble after a hit. I saw some slimes somewhere up there. Zenobia frowned at her fellow frontliner. Slimes? Slimes? Kiba, they're jellies. Even Asia can handle that much. Not expecting to be dragged, the holy maiden could only stutter her words. I don't think I can. I'm sorry. Hearing that, Zenobia sighed as she patted her back as a gesture of support. You're too kind-hearted for your own good. Can't be helped, I guess. You. Rhea smiled as her healer blushed. Meeting a person with her golden heart like Asia was truly a rare occurrence. Someone that never judged who you are, where you came from, whatever your race or past. It brought her relief knowing that people like her still exist, somewhere around the vast world. Like a breath of fresh air amidst the corruption. Slimes are monsters still. Kiba set up, always the gadfly of the group, this man. Zenovia's eyes returned to its fierce state as she glared at the swordsman, once again taking the bait. Those jellies aren't worth half their trouble. Well, that's rather discriminatory. They're still monsters. Zenobia groaned loudly while Kiba simply smiled, chalking one up to his scoreboard. Goblins and skeletons hardly offered much contest, true. In fact, they were the weakest monsters found here. A group of unwary adventurers could be fatally injured, annihilated even, and who could tell what would be done to their bodies afterwards before they would be left to rot. However, her party consisted of no such inexperienced amateurs. They had taken numerous quests, and had proven themselves to be renowned in their region. She did have a head start since she was of noble blood, but Rias too had persevered from the bronze rank, the second lowest rank for an adventurer. She still had to climb the ladder. Regardless, she found it hard to believe that the very dungeon that consumed the life of the world's champion would be this easy, and cheaply guarded too. The most difficult monster they faced was the Minotaur from the previous floor, and even then, they came out relatively unharmed, all thanks to her strategies and her party's skill and deference. A plan wouldn't work if they didn't follow it through, but then again, there is still that possibility. Maybe the champion killed them already. The petite-statured fighter chimed in while nibbling her roasted fish on a stick. He did bring nearly all of the adventurers with him. They must have gotten deeper. Rias muttered, officially joining the conversation. It is very possible they've slain most of the monsters here during their time, but, leaving us with the leftovers to deal with, Zenobia grouched. No wonder people never come here anymore. A pity, their dark-haired companion said with her soft tone. Blue sparks of electricity pranced between her delicate fingertips as she smiled. I've been very limited with my options of punishment lately. While most of the group felt an uncomfortable chill, including Kiba, Rias sighed loudly. Priestess of thunder, torturer of thunder, more like. She pitied the Minotaur guarding the last floor. If it had been a person, she would have at least spare him the suffering and end it swiftly. But a monster is a monster, and the only good kind of monster are the dead ones. And already dead monsters wasn't worth spending her magical reserves. As a leader, aside from leadership, she had to be pragmatic. Aquino seemed to have another opinion regarding magic efficiency. However, it was a good thing she had lots in reserve due to her fallen angel bloodline. Absently, her fingers played with the tip of her hat on her lap, the trademark apparel of almost all sorceress. They didn't help much aside from being an accessory and to prevent unwanted liquid landing on top of her crimson hair, but it was made from comfy material. And Rias thought it was cute too. No matter how it is, Rias continued the discussion, I doubt it'll be this easy. We wouldn't have to be here searching for him if it is. Don't forget that, for groups of adventurers have come to this place out of their curiosity. Mostly steel, but some of them were ranked bronze. Bronze-ranked parties shouldn't be troubled much by skeletons or goblins unless they were surrounded. They should have returned with most of their parties intact, but they didn't. For all I know, they might have been turned into one of the skeletons here. She raised her gaze, looking at all her party members that now gave their undivided attention at her. A silver-ranked party came to this dungeon a week ago before we did. Only one rank below us, yet from their 7 members, there's only 2 survivors. A fighter and a ranger. The fighter lost an arm and died not long after they arrived at the village due to blood loss, and the ranger refused to speak to anyone. Only today he finally did, saying that his party's leader is still in here. A knight. The same knight we're tasked to find. The dungeon might not be as horrifying as it once was, but it's never truly safe. Never will be until the beast is defeated. The line separating life and death here is very thin. A slip up and that's a line crossed. A line that even the champion has crossed. She hated to kill the jovial heir, but as their leader, she had to make sure her group never forget that they were facing death here. We're here not to kill monsters, but to retrieve the missing knight and return him. Remain on guard, and let us prepare and get this quest done, and head back safely. Agreed? Yes, Rias smiled, seeing the fire of determination burning in their eyes. If determination alone can light this dungeon, she wouldn't have to cast any illumination spell. break. By the keeper's request, the wardens had gathered in a large dark room that would otherwise be pitch black if not for the lights from the flock of fire wisps. They shone like fireflies, looking like a flying lit candle minus the candle. A species of a monster he once thought was a neutral since they never attacked him when he was an adventurer. Who knew these tiny fiery sprites could have allegiance? My scouts confirmed the devil is indeed their leader. The one with red hair. What she is still remains a mystery, but it's likely she's a sorceress or the like, basing from her robe, Fener told the group via convenient telepathy. Issei had always wondered if this calm and oddly smooth voice belonged to him. His roguish appearance could give a different impression. Don't judge the book by its cover, he supposed. He supposed that applied to this unarmored devil girl. The mixed breed is a fallen angel and human. Fener continued, she mainly casts spells from the lore of thunder, but my scouts reported she has purified skeletons using divination spells. My guess is that she's a priestess. The remainders are 2 human swordsmen and woman, a human priest, and a Fener paused. A pause so sudden that some monsters grew noticeably tense from the suspense. I forgot what her race is called. There echoed a loud groan of disappointment. She's not a beastkin, Fener continued hurriedly, but she does share similarities. Their species originated from your country's folklore, boss. One I'd thought you ought to be familiar with. Issei thought for a few seconds. Yokai? Fener grinned as if he was the one who answered. A yokai she is. A yokai. Issei raised his brow, which was well hidden by his helmet including the rest of his face and body. Having a yokai in a party of humans was not a common occasion. Their people were rather secluded back then, and having one in a party was considered an achievement in itself. That, or they were a slave, but he supposed many things could change in a year. What kind? One of my pack mentioned he thought of her as a cat. Perhaps one similar to a feline? Fener muttered, scrunching his nose in disgust. The Papa Wolf hates cats, Issei supposed. She's a close combatant, fighting with her fists. Petite and agile. Landed a hit on one of my scouts before he fled. Feline. Either a Nikomata or the worst of its species variation, a Nekisha. Though if her method of fighting was any indication, it seemed to him she was just a Nikomata. Nekishas tend to use their unique jitsu in most cases, preferring to fight in a distance akin to a mage, but still had the ability to hold a close combat fight. If she was nothing more than a Nikomata, he wouldn't have to worry about her too much. All right. Issei nodded at the father of wolves. His usual quiet gesture of appreciation towards anyone since he first picked up his wooden training sword. 6 people, 1 devil and 1 fallen angel half-breed. Who is a priestess? His helmet pointed at one of the monster's commander. Have your goblins tried separating them? The boys tried, Boz. The orc warlord grunted, his voice heavy like his build and his big damn axe. They didn't try enough. Idiots is idiots. As Grimger Giant Spain roared into a laughter, the small group snickered. The Skeleton King's hollow laugh echoed eerily throughout the empty jaded room. His voice cut through the laughter. What about your skeletons? Any luck? Roughly the same. The Skeleton King grumbled, the green ember in his eye sockets dimming. My warriors met their end through purification or reduced to ashes, and the archers can't hit them. They can conjure a barrier. Sorceresses and their cunning cowardice. Cowards. The lots of them. Chuckling lightly, Issei allowed the 2 company leaders rivet in their mirth. Low-tier monsters such as goblins and the low-tier undead weren't much of a loss. They were the bulk of the first bastion, the first line of defense of the dungeon, spanning from the 1st floor to the 15th. But had those been the black orcs that were slain, or the skeletal dragon, either of them would be laughing, which was why they should prevent these adventurers from slaying the already endangered units. He and his band of misfits had wiped almost every elite monsters in the dungeon, one of which being the World Serpent, Midgardsormr something damned Norse, and their tongue-twisting names. Nonetheless, the casualties he and his band of heroes caused never recovered. Most elites were dead, and the 2nd bastion and 3rd were critically crippled in strength. Same could be said for the 1st bastion as well. Goblins requires time to breed and mature and needed basic training on how to wield a club, and even more time to grow into a hobgoblin and ultimately an orc or an ogre. Skeletons couldn't reanimate the instant they fell, and less so when they were purified since there were nothing left to animate. That said, many high-ranked adventurers also died that day. He supposed that was the reason why visitors were rare. He often wondered what his parents were thinking about their son right now. Would they be proud if they knew? Well, he knew they would. They were his parents, and they believed in him. He just hoped he hadn't disappointed them. Enough of that whimsical thinking. All right. Issei muttered. I'm guessing they've only faced the meat shields so far? A rough term. Harsh, even. But not a term foreign for these monsters that they had to express disgust for that term. Asterian's burning skull nodded. Goblins, skeletons. A few zombies. Slimes that somehow crept to the surface. Black slimes? Useless slimes. Grimger grouched, growling his menacing Orcish growl. They killed 5 of me hobgobs. Let me send Jarakel and let him butcher him. Then a loud huff erupted, like the sound of a raging bull. They killed my little brother. Tortured him as if he was a toy. They spared him no dignity. The Minotaur seethed in barely restrained fury. Steam shot out from his nostrils, and his dark eyes brimmed with rage as the humanoid bull looked at Issei. Let me avenge his death. I'll gore them all. I swear by Rieger's name, I will gore them all. Easy now, you'll have your turn, Taurus. Issei spoke calmly. He appreciated the fervor, but Minotaur's short temper had been the bane of their existence. Too often they had died because of their uncontrolled rage. I'm sorry for your brother. We'll have time to mourn, but later, not now. Keep being like this, and you'll die the same way your brother did. Adventurers know you have a limited fuse, and it's likely they used it against your brother. The Minotaur puffed loudly. And it's unfortunate, but we have to postpone your revenge a little. Remember that we severely lack manpower, Taurus. And a healer, on top of all. The succubi are barely good nurse, to be fair. They specialized at the other form of nursing. And right now, I see 6 potential additions to this dungeon. If we have a better healer, your brother might have been saved. The muscles on his arms bulged as he gripped his battle axe tighter. Minotaurs were not a creature to be insulted without causing a loss of limbs or head, but after a moment of time and a long exhale of breath, Taurus eased down. Whatever your call, master, good lad. Issei nodded. This is the 5th group this year. Fener's voice invaded their minds. Do you propose they will be any different? Not a single person believed me. But 1 or 2 of them were killed before we were able to talk. Issei shot a meaningful glance at a particular skeleton king and a particular orc warlord, who looked away and pretended they were enthralled by the fire wisps. Sometimes, they both tend to forget that not everyone was like the champion, and could withstand a direct blow to their head. Issei sighed. Anyway, this group can either be the same adventure-seeking adventurers who come here just for the sake of it, or they can be the one who accepted a quest from our last visitors, and is confident that they can complete it. If that's the case, then they're better prepared. Hopefully have some sense in their head to negotiate instead of attacking back and dying senselessly. That's why I'd like to have a chance with them. Don't kill any one of them, but we'll try to capture 1 or 2 as our hostage and gain bargaining power. Is that clear? Boz, clear as it can be. No killing, Issei nodded. That means you as well, Taurus, the bull puffed. I got it. I won't fail you. Then all was silent as the keeper considered their strategy. The group seemingly breathed again all at once when Issei suddenly spoke. 2 swordsmen, are they armored? The male has arm guards and shin guards, Fener said, and already both the orc warlord and the skeleton king laughed mockingly. No armor? Bah! Are their skin made of steel? Even steel won't save them from a cleave of my sword, and my axe! Grimger shouted eagerly. Fener waited until the 2 had their share of fun before he continued the briefing. The female doesn't wear anything but a weird combat suit. A bit similar to a swimsuit. Issei nodded. Wait, how do you know what a swimsuit looks like? Well, there's a lake outside where I used to drink, where the lasses and lads swim around. I'm stuck here hiding myself and you get to ogle girls in their swimsuits? Issei eyed the father of wolves with suspicion as Fener became visibly nervous. Only he did, since the wardens only had battle and fighting in their brains. Except Asterian, maybe. Did he even have a brain in his skull? Regardless, so they sacrificed defense for mobility. That's a bit stupid, I guess. Back then, Issei considered it to be a smart choice. Couldn't get hurt if they couldn't hit him, right? And if things went awry, he would be running faster than someone at least, right? It wasn't until he ran out of stamina and received a permanent claw marks across his chest he changed his mind. Luckily, they weren't deep. The girls dug it too, so that was a blessing in disguise. But ever since that incident, he was never seen fighting without an armor. They will surely protect the devil if she's the leader. This floor's cramped corridors can act as bottlenecks, giving them tactical advantage despite their numbers. We'll need to lure them to this room where you can flock them from all sides, no one argued. Tactically wise, issei far outclassed them. Astarion, still willing to lend us a few bones? Ha! Of course. Always ready in your command. The Skeleton King yelled proudly, mystical red flame enveloping his skull as he lifted his great sword to his shoulder with ease. He might have lost some of his muscles and flesh, okay, not some, but all of them, but this bony king would never crumble that easily, issei sniggered. A simple ask for favor and his skeletal head was high up in the sky. Silly old bonehead, tell your skeleton crew to attack them from the rear, drive them here with force. They're experienced and it's a narrow place, so expect heavy losses and hope that they use their swords more rather than spells. Very well. The Skeleton King nodded. What's my part in this? That's it. What? I am this floor's warden and I am to stay idle while those wretched cretins roam my floor? Yes, issei said flatly. They have a priestess, Astarion. And she's a holy maiden, it seems. Picked after the last holy maiden died in this very dungeon. My plans aren't foolproof. Besides, Taurus and Grimgar are here. They'll be your substitutes for the time being. At the same time, Grimgar's goblins will fill the corridors and join the attack when they pass. Make sure they won't circle around. On it, boss. Hey you! Grimgar then turned to his left, towards a goblin that was only a midget compared to his size. Ya heard him. Send the boys. One empty corridor and I'll bash your skull in. Startled, the goblin scampered outside the room while Grimgar guffawed. Are you doubting my abilities, lad? The Skeleton King fears nothing. Not even purification. Who will take command of the Skeleton Company if their Skeleton King walks into the light? You don't have an heir to take your crown, you know. If you're gone, that's half the force of this place gone. Bah! Astarion spat a spit of fire, as he begrudgingly jammed his greatsword into the cold cobblestones. You're too clever with your words and mind, boy. Can't say I like that. I respect you and your plans, but I don't like it. Red be much a simpler keeper, may his soul rest easy. Issei shifted on his feet. They should have held the council where there were chairs. Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I'm not here to repeat his mistakes or make one. The Great Red, as the former keeper of the dungeon, had kept the dungeon well. Fended off pesky adventurers. Hundreds even. But obviously not enough. The proof was most gold-ranked parties could reach the 20th basement floor before they were either killed or retreated, but Issei was different. He might not have the same amount of sagacity of the Great Red or equaled his strength, but he possessed several things the dragon lacked: cunning and size. The Great Red was stuck in that massive cavern located at the very bottom, supervising everything by relying to Fener's information and a small crystal ball to keep watch. Issei, in the other hand, didn't have that humongous of a body. While Great Red had to wait for a new challenger to appear, Issei was able to approach and deliver them the challenge. More to that, he could walk through the dungeon floors without looking. He wasn't a perverted fool who took up the challenge of defeating the beast without any preparations and rely on blind dumb luck. He was the pervert who had traveled every floor, finding and tracing every potential spot for a trap or two. He knew how to distinguish a safe passage and a passage that would lead to an endless chasm or a pit of spikes, or a bit of both. He learned and understood the dungeon like a book he read over and over before committing himself fully to slay the harbinger of apocalypse. And on top of it all, he was a former adventurer himself. He knew how an adventurer's mind works. At least, those who shared the same level of capability like him. Aside from the fact the Great Red chose him himself, Issei had proven himself to these monsters of his skills, both as their enemy and now their ally. For that, he had gained their respect, and the obedience needed to ensure the effectivity of his plans. The evidence? Not a single soul that had successfully went past the 16th floor, and their heads were planted on a spike to act as an effigy for any daring adventurers. It didn't keep all of them at bay and made them rethink their decision of spelunking to the dungeon, but it did hold back some of them, and that's that. Anyone need any rerun? The helmeted young man glanced around. Once, twice. No arguments. Good. With that, he brought up the flanged mace strapped on his belt. It was well smithied, but nothing grandiose. Not worth more than a gold. In fact, It was an ordinary flange mace once held by a knight that ventured too deep in the dungeon, and so was his armor set. But dead knights need no armor. Unless they were undead. Issei, on the other hand, still had some use for them. They're preparing to advance, better send your skeletons quick. Fener told them. Being able to see through the eyes of his wolves must be one hell of convenience. I'll leave the rest to all of you. For red. Issei nodded, and adjusted his grip on his mace and shield. And Rieger, Red and my brother. Taurus readied his large battle axe. A single swing of it could and had decapitated limbs from bodies or heads from necks. Several limbless corpses would testify if they weren't dead. And Grimger. Grahahaha. With the orc warlord's booming laughter, the fire wisps scattered, allowing darkness to envelop the room. The only light being the flame surrounding the skull of the skeleton king as he and Fener teleported away not long after. Thus his plan commenced. Dark in here. Burn something? Issei's sigh flew in the darkness. Just get your goblins to help the skeletons. I so grumbled the orc warlord. Break. Firing a black blaze, Triss flew away as Drake's fire breath charred the ground she stood. Her chaotic orb collided with the dragon's scales, yet no damage was dealt to the crimson dragon. Not even a scratch or so much of a scrape as the dusky fumes faded away. Not much of a surprise, really. Mid-flight, Triss readied another spell. Another lump of chaotic energy gathered in her hand, generating an unsteady spherical black orb that violently pulsated and burned the air around it. She bore a grin, but before she could unleash the spell, Drake swatted her with his tail. Triss shrieked, although mostly due to surprise rather than pain. She was caught safely in Drake's giant red palm, as she would fling to the cavern wall had he didn't. As the stars swirling around faded, the dragon snickered. Today's lesson is, don't forget what your foes can do. I have a tail, lass. A very long and strong tail. You're still 1,000 years too young to stand a chance before the mighty me, lass. Shaking her head and blinking several times, Triss scowled as she sat up. Obviously. You're as old as an artifact. I'm surprised your scales aren't antiqued yet, brat. Unlike her or his partner, Drake's draconic tongue wasn't as sharp. Wordlessly, the almighty dragon tossed her like someone would to a piece of garbage. Triss merely giggled gleefully as her misty wings helped her land safely. Once she felt her soles on the craggy ground, the young girl looked at the dragon as he shrunk in size. No flashy lights, no fancy magic, no nothing. Drake just shrunk like a deflating balloon. When he was done deflating, he was only half the dragon he was. What are you looking at? Don't stare. It's rude. Nothing, she said curtly. I'm just wondering how he beats Red. Red's tougher than both of you, right? Drake scratched his chest at the spot where Triss' earlier attack connected. It was a bit itchy. HRM, my partner, you mean? No. Your cousin. I don't have cousin, Triss groaned audibly. How could she forget the Crimson Emperor Dragon was a full-time dragon of stupidity? Yes, I meant him. Your partner or whatever. She muttered as she walked around the large cavern, kicking a small pebble around. Back then, I was so scared. That was my first time seeing a fight, you know. I didn't even know that killing exists, he huffed as he lied down. I can't imagine how it feels like, not knowing anything? Horrible. Her crimson eyes fell upon the cave where she once hid, cowering behind the rock like a terrified lamb while the wolves fought outside. All my life, this is the only place where I have been. Whenever there's a group of adventurers, even the words still tasted odd in her mouth. Coming to this place, Red will send me to my room. No matter what the time, no matter where they are. Listlessly, she gazed at the neatly stacked pile of rocks located near the corner of the grotto. I thought he was angry at me if I knew. Drake lazily followed her gaze. A tinge of sadness was felt then as he saw the stack of boulders marking the grave of the once great Red. He was only trying to protect you. I know, Triss sighed, turning away. She didn't like being seen when unhappy. I just wished I knew how to protect myself. I don't want to be a hapless cub my entire life. I want to be able to protect something. Even if you knew, he would never allow you. I know it's just another sigh. He gave his life while all I did was hide and watch. And now it's the same with him. He's out there fighting while I'm stuck here. I'm stuck here with you too, but I'm not complaining. Triss spun around to send a glare at Drake, who cackled in return. You don't hate my partner, do you? What? Guess not. I'm not good at those complicated things. Feelings, or all that jazz. And he didn't feel the need to. He was a dragon. Why would you think that? Dunno. I told you I'm no good at those things, Triss frowned. Why couldn't Fener be with them? He had furs while Drake had sturdy hard scales unfit to be lied upon like a bed. And Fenrir wasn't as dumb. What I know, however, is this: it's no use fretting over the past, lassie. What's been done is done. Can't be changed less you're a time traveler. Not like I can change much if I am. Drake puffed. You brooder. He tried cheering her up, and that was how she responded. Exhausted from her exercise, Triss took a seat on the ground, wiping off the sweat gliding down her chin as she glanced at the cavern's ceiling. Staring at the stalactites destroyed at the battle that took her guardian's life. And those people. How did he do it? Drake only bothered opening one of his eyes. HRM? The people that were fighting with him, they were his friends, right? His party? Party, aye. Drake rested his eye again, shifting his head to feel more comfortable on his arms. What about them? Triss felt sad. How did he kill them? With his sword. Triss felt annoyed. You're a dumb dragon, Drake snorted. Silence reigned as she mulled over what her guardian had done for her before he took the mantle to become her last guardian. Her heart throbbed as she remembered the way he drove a sword into the heart of that one bald man, and how angered he became afterward as he returned to face her guardian. Well, former guardian, he wasn't like me, he has had a life out there, right? People who he cared about. Her voice softened to a whisper, riddled with guilt and sorrow. And those were his friends, why did he kill them? How could he kill them? For once, Drake thought long as he cultivated an answer. He's no genius, that partner of mine. Drake said to her, he's not the greatest of person either. Lots of knights or bunch of people with shiny armors out there are more chivalrous than him. For all the time I've spent with him, your guardian is more of a pervert rather than a glorious knight. And he's not ashamed of it. Not one bit. Triss rolled her eyes, regretting she ever asked. But yes, he has a family. Parents that I know completely admires him. He's adored by the people despite his minor setback. He has enemies, yes, but they respect him as rival, begrudgingly as they were. He's crowned the world's champion, but never once he claimed he's a champion or anything less or more. He doesn't forget who he was when he began, as a simple boy who wanted to do the right thing. He doesn't want to be a hero. He does what he thought is right. Drake remembered. Back then, it was fighting Trihexa. Who he didn't know was the Great Red instead. Now, it's to keep you and this world safe and stopping Trihexa from being reborn. Triss blinked in astonishment. This grand dragon had always been carefree, stolid, merry. She had never heard him speak with such fervor before. You respect him. He is my partner. He responded straightforwardly as it was a fact. It might not be my place to say this, but as his partner, you ought to be wise and make sure he and Great Red doesn't give up those things for nothing. Triss hugged herself. Was it all because of her? I know. It's why I want to train. Train and be strong like him. If I can protect myself better. You still know nothing, Tristania Lindes. Drake sighed. All this time and still she hadn't changed. The red-haired girl made an offended look. What's that supposed to mean? Why did you call me with my full name? It means what it is supposed to mean. Drake breathed as he let out a mighty yawn. Time for a quick nap. Get some rest, lass. He'll be back when or before you wake up. Don't try to be sneaky now. I might be sleeping, but I'll always know, she groaned. Everybody else seemed to know more than her. Even the slimes. Flying towards a small exit at the back of the cavern, Triss retreated to her room. She stared down the hallway lit by torches on the walls. It was long and filled with many corridors. Each corridor would have a door leading to a room. Rooms that were once filled by the wardens. A warden for each floor from the 1st to the 40th. The last floor that was the dungeon's end. Now, only 3 wardens for each 15 floors. 7 in total. Too many empty rooms filled with memories of the cheers and laughter, and the merry singing of the monsters after a successful day, or a reverie for the fallen. Now the halls were hollow and devoid of songs. Opening a door nearby, she was greeted with the sight of several wooden furniture crafted by the dwarves, and a bed made by pelts of wolves and sheep. Some of it might even be one of Fener's wolves. Wolves who were slain and died in their line of duty. Great Red had shielded her from the truth to keep her from hurt, but finding the truth on her own hurt more. Too many lives had gone all for her sake, lives she could never return. Through his lie, she had to learn what loss meant. Worry slipped in her mind as she thought of her guardian. She wished to never understand how losing him would feel. Triss sprawled on the bed, quietly asking for forgiveness for enjoying these furs perhaps a bit too much. But they were soft. Warm. They welcomed her fingers as they sunk. The scent was flowery, perhaps rose, perhaps tulips. She wouldn't know, she had never seen any flowers other than those two that the succubi brought. As she lied on her side, Triss stared blankly at the dark cavern walls and the small lantern hanging there, before closing her eyes and hummed a requiem for the departed, remembering those who once shared their laughter and told her stories. And as a prayer for the safety of her guardian, break their close. Issei could hear the bones clanking against the cold cobblestone floor. Accompanying its tune was the grisly sound of steel shredding through goblins' flesh and muscles, added with several war cries or shrieks of the goblins alongside the fervent yelling and spell names and commands being shouted. The adventurers seemed to be moving smoothly despite the chaos. Those poor skeletons and goblins barely stood a chance. Non-existent, perhaps. It would need a miracle or a massive amount of bodies and skeletons to tire them out. But even as meat shields, Issei couldn't sacrifice too much, and he didn't believe in miracles. There was nothing else could be done. Their casualties couldn't be avoided. They'll be here soon. Issei muttered as he brought up his steel shield, reeling back his focus on the task. On my go, I boss. I'll be gentle. With one muscular and green hand, Grimger lifted the armored man. They waited, counting the seconds as the fire wisps watched anxiously, hiding behind the pillars. A flash of blue light seeped through the gaps of the wooden door separating them and the adventurers. The footsteps loudened, and the fighting came closer. Now, the orcs chose their leader by power, and Grimger had justified why he was chosen as theirs. With a swing, he sent the keeper flying. Rias turned her head to the source of a loud crash, which was the resulting noise of an armored man smashing through the wooden double door, effectively breaking it beyond repair. The armor flew several more feet before a wall stopped his flight, then it slid down into a pile of bones as they rattled. Her eyes widened with realization that the figure could be their missing person. You! Hang in there! Rias shouted to inform the rest. Yudo, Zenobia, stay in the rear and switch with Kaneko if you need time. It won't be long now. We might have found him. Yes. Kiba, Zenobia, and Kaneko yelled all together, battling against the horde of monsters and skeletons, plowing them down with terrifying finesse and power, while Kaneko remained behind them, crushing the head of those who managed to slip past the edge of their swords. Zenobia's blue-bladed greatsword swept low, chopping off several goblin heads and turning a few skeleton warriors into crawlers. They kept clawing at her until she crushed their skull with another swing. Kiba couldn't hit as many targets in one swing like her, but his speed made up for it. Dodging and weaving and striking when the opportunity arose, the blonde knight took care of a mixed group of 10 monsters on his own. You three! Clear space! Rias yelled, and the vanguards gave birth as torrent of demonic energy blitzed between them, incinerating through the monsters. The now scorched skeletons couldn't speak, and simply tried to move closer before their bones turned brittle and crumbled. The goblins, however, screeched in agony as their flesh melted to the bones. Enough was enough. Their morale had been wiped out and their fighting strength waned. They're running away! Kiba cheered as he wiped a splatter of goblin blood off his pretty face. He then smiled refreshingly at his fellow sword user, exchanging compliments and all of that pleasantries. I got 22. Zenobia said proudly, heaving her breath, smiling. How many did you two get? I didn't know we keep count. Kaneko shrugged as she nonchalantly brushed a chunk of flesh off her arm. About 17 or so. Kiba admitted, and the girl's smile grew wider with pride. That's why you should learn how to wield a bigger sword, Kiba smiled. Oh, it's never about the size, Zenobia, it's how you use it. Well, I used it better than you did anyway. Great work, everyone. The devil cheered, proud of her group as she viewed the gory dungeon, filled with charred goblin corpses and ashes. Once again coming out unharmed against such odds. But there was no time for celebration as she hurried the group to help the fallen knight. They rushed to him, with Zenobia on the front and Kiba and Kaneko watching their back in case the monsters tried to have another go. Are you all right? Rias crouched by the fallen warrior. He was a human, she knew. Her devil senses rarely lied to her. He groaned in response, moving ever so slightly among the pile of bones. Hang in there. She turned to her healer. Asia, Asia nodded and quickly went to his side, casting a healing spell on his chest just as Grimger Giantsbane let out a colossal roar. It came from the center of the room ahead of them as the fire wisps swirled around him, granting him an enviable sinister effect. Come dead meats. Come face Grimger Giantsbane and die trying. Hra ha 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 ha. If that didn't take their attention, nothing will. On your position! Now, alerted by the warlord's presence, the vanguards took their place with Aquino and Rias behind them, both ready to cast their spell while guarding Asia. Grimger Giantsbane, the warlord Rias quietly whispered as she stared down the heavily armored orc, whose size doubled the size of a black orc, who was double the size of a normal orc, who was double the size of a regular man. That thing had the same size of 16 human, and still outpowered them. Thinking fast, she assessed the situation. They had just survived a wave of skeletons and goblins, and it was too soon to commit themselves for another fight. Kaneko, stay with Asia while she heals him. Zenobia, you have to distract him, or even beat him if possible. Double team with Kiba. Conserve your energy. Aquino, ready your spell. If it can't kill him, it might paralyze him long enough. Kiba and Zenobia nodded. Fufufu, I thought you'd never say that. The priestess' face was enlightened by the blue thunders crackling between her palms. Smiling a wicked smile that admittedly sent chill down the warlord's spine, but fear never latched permanently on Grimger Giantsbane's green skin. Too afraid? Stand there and watch? Puny Meatbags has no courage? Rias considered the chance it was a trap, but orcs and plans never really shared a common ground. Go. We'll cover you. The swordsmen and swordswomen marched into the dimly lit room, approaching the broken double doors, sword in tight grip and eyes of steel. While all attention was drawn to the orc warlord and his sad taunts, Asia watched in confusion as the man she was supposed to be healing had risen to his feet. Are you okay, sir? Please sit down if you're still hurt. He glanced down to her, and gave her a quiet nod. She smiled cutely, even as a metallic fist was driven to her chin, knocking her out in an instant. Sorry. Had to. Issei caught the blonde girl before she could fall and alert the others of his heinous act of betrayal. Not a betrayal if he wasn't on their side in the first place, but they surely had other opinion on that. With their medic gone, the next concern would be the leader. Get her and her party will bow down, and therefore, an open door for negotiation. A blow with his mace should suffice. She didn't look like the strong, resilient type that could withstand a blow to the head. But as he was about to sneak behind her, the shortest girl of their party turned around as if she sensed him. Her eyes widened at the fainted girl in his arms. Traitor, whelp. There went his chances. So much for easy picking. The crimson-haired sorceress and the Thunder Priestess turned around. You! She looked horrified when she saw her healer. What did you do to her? His spalders chimed as he shrugged, keeping his arm around the girl's neck. Move, and I'll break her neck. They all gritted their teeth. It sucked to be their bad guy, but this bad guy needed to do it if he wanted to keep the world intact. Inside the room, Zenobia was busy leaping out from the swing of Grimger's axe. She had parried it once, but her arms shook from his insane power. She dodged another slash by ducking underneath. She brandished her great sword horizontally, only for it to create a loud clang as it met the orc warlord's armor. Hra ha ha ha! With a downward swing, Grimger caused a crater in the floor as Zenobia had leapt out of the way. She wasn't the fastest, but she was faster than him. However, one hit from the giant axe, and she would be a dead swordswoman. Behind her, Kiba was distracted by the commotion behind him. When he turned his head away from the fight, a minotaur emerged from the shadows and rammed him hard. Kiba's scream was drowned by Taurus' powerful roar and his thundering hooves as the bull hurled him to a pillar. The air in his lungs was ripped out from his throat. Pain seemed to shred his back open, and his face was punched by the floor as he fell, knocking him out cold. The Minotaur's roar took her attention of the fight, and horror twisted her face once she saw her partner lying on the ground, not moving. Your fight is with me. Hreaf! Grimger swung down his axe that made her great sword look like a needle. Zenobia managed to bring up her blade and supported it by placing a palm on its flat end, but the orc warlord's brute force was inhuman. He pushed her down to a kneel, and as her arms trembled from the pressure, Grimger swung his offhand and delivered a brutal punch to her side. Gaha dash! Durandal, her great sword, slipped off her grip, and Zenobia screamed in pain as the floor grazed against her face and side, tearing her combat suit and scraping her skin. Her fighting spirit hadn't died yet, but her entire body was trembling from the pain. Her right side felt hot due to the scrapes, and she felt a few ribs were broken by that single punch. As she struggled to pick herself up, clutching her side, the warlord had towered before her. He had the edge of his black axe pointed at her face, and he grinned mockingly with his unkempt yellow teeth, and a fang that reached his scarred eye. She noticed the Minotaur did the same to her fallen companion. The realization dawned on her like a numbing truth. They had lost. Seeing the success of the wardens, issei smiled smugly. For he was smug when things went accordingly to his plan. It's over. He finally spoke to the remainders of the adventurers. He noted the priestess still had her thunder spell ready in her hands, and the sorceress herself looked no less angered with a very dangerous black orb flying on her palm. A spell from the lore of devils, he supposed. Magics were never his forte. The small brawler even had her fists raised and coated in white aura. Senjutsu. Issei thought. Not that the ability mattered now. You've lost. Look at your friends. Your healer's in my hand and your two swordsmen beaten. Those brutes can swing their axe faster than you can fire your spells at me, not to mention, and can twist her neck like a twig. Her look of defiance was rather stimulating. Damn him and his gratifications of sadism. Her body too. Sorceress always had that stimulating air, especially with their low neckline wizard robe. The priestess wasn't much different either. Even with that expression and her traditional white robe covered in goblin blood, these women certainly were beautiful. God damn it, Issei, focus, you damn pervert. Before silence took over for too long that it became awkward silence instead, Issei continued. Cast out your spells, lower your weapon. Listen to me, and this girl can do her job. Healing her friends, that is. You're with the monsters? If I wasn't, would your friends be alive? Both Grimger and Taurus snarled in the room. Grimger kept his axe just about to nick Zenovia's unprotected neck, while Kiba was carried by Taurus on his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. The Minotaur made sure everyone knew a twist was all he needed to turn the night into a gory mess. Rhea swallowed. This man had to be one of the Trihex's servants. How can we trust you? Are your friends being alive not enough? His helmet made a small metallic noise as Issei slanted his head. Do you have any other choices? TCH, very well. Her tone was that of defeat as the malevolent orb faded into nothing. Don't harm them. We surrender. Her two remaining party members looked at her in shock, but realized there really wasn't much option. The brawler lowered her fists, canceling out her white aura, while the priestess irately sent her spell to the empty hallway. Blue thunder blasted through the hall, and a loud rumble was then heard as the dungeon walls crumbled. I apologize, she smiled with just her lips. I can't uncast my spell. They're too unstable at times. Issei ignored that veiled threat or a show of power. He didn't spare them to keep them as enemies. Good to hear. I'll have to keep those two and this girl as hostages though. They won't get hurt, and they'll be fed. Your healer included. When she's no longer knocked out, she can heal them. Rias felt his stare beneath the helmet, staring deep into her eyes. She tried to read him, wondering what kind of man lied under that normal armor. As long as you listen, that is. Her fists were shaking. To be defeated and having to comply with an enemy, she failed them as their leader. The least she could do was keep them alive as long as she could, or provide them with a swift death before she took her life. I accept. Issei wasted no time. Those swordsmen and women might suffer internal damage. Grimger, Taurus, bring those two to the infirmary. Get one wolf in there and have two of your black orcs on guard. Right, Obaz. Understood, master. Before she vanished with the two giants vanished in bright white light, Zenobia managed to look at her leader. Her expression was nothing but remorseful. Rias, I'm sore. Rias bit her lower lip. She had failed her. She had failed them all. Not that great of a first impression, I admit. Issei said, earning their look of disbelief. They must have thought he was mocking them. Rias eyed him, wondering what kind of demon hiding behind that armor. Why did you kill those who came here before? They didn't listen, he replied, not feeling much remorse. The casualties were so needless. If only they had listened, Motohama and Matsuda would still be alive. They might even be standing next to him instead of being buried. I have this gut feeling that you will understand better than they did. Understand what? That you have defeated us? Issei had forgotten that too many questions irked him. The monsters never quarreled with him more than needed. Not even Drake. Maybe Triss, but she was a special exception. Understand why you and your party is still alive instead of being sent to the surface limb by limb. Issei warned. He might be friendly, but they still need to remember they were still his captives. And understand why I'm doing all of this. Rias took careful note of the warning, reminding herself about crossing the line. But why did you kill them? And to even do such barbaric thing to their body? I never said it wasn't barbaric. But even that is needed to be done, Issei said calmly. I'll explain everything later. Answer whatever questions you have. Then, you can decide whether to believe me or not. And if, by chance, we don't believe you still? Well, he looked at her as lights gathered under their feet, alarming them for a few seconds until they realized it was a teleportation spell. Then I guess you're all dead after all. Rias nor anyone from her party might not considered as renowned adventurer. Fortune hunters, explorers, and of those terms people keep coming up with. She didn't even have a guild. Not yet, at the least. However, she had traveled far from her country. Perhaps thousands of miles away from her place of birth and growing, from the Gremry castle of which she was raised with loving and admittedly doting family for 19 years until she ultimately left it. It was during the coming year when she met many different people and her current party members. She learned many skills her 12 years of formal education didn't teach her, ranging from the basic street smarts from petty thieves, how to haggle down a greedy salesperson, what magic was easiest to learn yet effective, and how to talk her way out from a band of brigands or deal with them her own if need be. She had conversed with plenty fresh adventurers and bought a round of meads for battle-hardened veterans. Warriors, mages, and the like, although there weren't much of them left after the event that transpired a year ago. Never the bitter and soured ones, however. They never left their houses after a life-changing tragedy struck them, such as losing their family or their entire heirloom to one unfortunate gamble. But it was the first time she witnessed a transportation magic utilized by a human warrior. Or who she assumed a warrior at least. His dirty tactics proved that the armored man had the cunning of a rogue despite his heavy set of armor suggested he was a close combat fighter. Yet, both rogue or warrior or other occupations that placed technique over spells rarely had enough the magical capacity needed to cast a spell this advanced. Then again, this man could and possibly was a servant of Trihexa. A possibility she shouldn't overlook. Warily, as the blinding lights died down and as the putrid smell of the dungeon's air dispersed to one friendlier for the nose, Rias opened her eyes. Red. That was the first thought crossing her mind as they took in the scenery. The word following afterwards being humongous. Their gaze swept upon the vast red soil, the stalactites sprouting from the cavern's ceiling, the rocky uneven red walls surrounding them. Welcome, the armored man began with a tone of nonchalance, her healer still unconscious in his carry. To the dungeon's end. Their eyes widened. This place is the end? Rias muttered out loud in stark disbelief, before she realized the huge chunk of red rock was instead a sleeping dragon. Is that Trihexa? Her followers all trailed their eyes at the fearsome beast, while issei paused for a moment. If he's Trihexa, this world has nothing to fear. Issei monotoned. He would be gladdened to find I have brought him 4 virgin maidens before him. Rias gritted her teeth as a strike of dread punched her chest. You've got this far alive. Don't change it. Issei warned before any of the magic users could conjure anything, or before Kaneko fixed her stance. Without another word, he lent them their healer back. Akino and Kaneko both acted quick to grab a hold of the unconscious blonde maiden. Returning their healer was not a show of trust, but an act to show his confidence. He knew she wouldn't risk her party's life, and knowing that he knew didn't make it any easier for her. You said no harm will come to us, as long as you listen, of course. The man left them as he walked towards the slumbering dragon. They held their stare at his plated back for a moment, wondering the face inside, before eventually becoming aware of the small crowd of various monsters shuffling lightly at their left. One particularly large monster was lying on the ground, seemingly dead. If earlier was dread, it was fear and guilt that struck her gut. She realized who those monsters were, and what they were doing, burying the minotaur her group had killed. Rias, what is that? Even Akino had lost her grace at the sight of the inhumanely enormous build. Compared to other monsters, he was the most human-like. But he wasn't much different to a monster. 2 arms. A torso. 2 legs. But what made him distinct were crescent formed by the 2 horns as long as an elephant's tusk jutting out from both sides of its helmet. A being cladded in heavy set of black steel armor. A black bear pelt donned over his red cloak, covering his large, enormous build, embroidered with large white pearl-like beads. The terrifying figure held no weapon or shield, but Rias feared his hands could easily crush a human skull. When Archeon, the ever-chosen of chaos, moved his head ever so slightly, she felt her blood run cold from his gaze. 2 embers in his eye socket, and another on its forehead glaring ominously red. Then she realized those weren't white beads embedded on the mantle. Those were skulls. Human skulls. Worse, he was only one from the many monstrosities here in the dungeon. There's no escape. We can't defeat all of them, none of them. Her eyes shifted to the dragon rising from its rest, yawning a low growl that made her skin shudder from its rumble. HRMMHM? Drake peeked open an eye, the black round pupil turning into a serpent-like slit as he eyed down the keeper. Oh, you're back. The dragon muttered indifferently. Those miscreants dealt with? Another mighty yawn ensued as he stretched out his leathery wings, his ritual after a nap. Rias made a face. And miscreants? For now. Issei replied, glancing around as if looking for someone. Where's she? The lass was being a mopey brat, so I sent her to her room. Sleeping, most likely, he said, and his partner nodded his helmet in response. It was then Drake noticed Rias' group, who all visibly flinched when he looked in their direction. His dragonic green eyes blinked. You didn't kill them? They can't fight if they're dead. The blithely said statement earned him demeaning look from the adventurers. No use for you dead. Fair point. Groaning, Drake rose to his full stature, tripling Issei's height as he peered around. He noted a flock of the dungeon's wardens lowering down a bipedal, muscular monster into a grave. Who is that? Isn't that Rieger? Was, oh. The Crimson Dragon replied in a quieter voice. Somberly. So why are these louts alive? The adventurers understandably took a step back. Rias didn't like this. The fate her group's life was not in their hands, because they're not stupid. The ex-champion swiveled on his boots and went back to the small group of adventurers. Rias clenched her fists. Twice in her life she had ever felt so powerless. Held captive by an unknown person, her party separated, surrounded by monsters who could and have torn apart legendary adventurers, only alive under this man's mercy. And where are you heading? The hall. If she comes looking for me, tell her I'm busy, assuming she wakes up. The dragon nodded as he flew over towards the funeral. Come. Let's. Issei beckoned in a light tone despite sounding gruff. Her guess was that this man would be around his mid-20s. She swallowed her breath. Can we see my companions now, your swordsman? Yes. Issei replied curtly. Wake your friend, unless she can heal while asleep. Issei briefly wondered if mages had trouble casting spells in their sleep. Dash. Asia woke up with a gasp as Akino splashed water on her face. Break. Cautiously, Rias and her group walked past 2 black orcs guarding the door as they entered the room, their yellow eyes glaring at her group. She saw a giant wolf sitting at the corner of the room, overlooking the infirmary. A sentry, she guessed. The infirmary, or at least what the craggy room with limited beds was meant to be, was a calm and quiet place, with only the crackles from the torches latched on the red walls. The air was cool on her skin, and the cavernous room was dimly lit by the torches. The beds were manually built by hands using wooden materials and bales of straws lumped in sewn clothes as bedding. Rias supposed the clothes were from the unlucky adventurers before her. Resting on 2 of the beds were none other than her frontliners. You have such a peculiar body. Toned firm yet still retain that peculiar softness a woman possesses. As expected from a female warrior. I would be more than glad to relieve your stress. And no thanks. My, unexpectedly bashful as well. The nurse smirked tantalizingly. How adorable. Fufa, that's a bonus point in my book. Zenobia saw Rias at the edge of her vision, and cried out a quiet voice. Help. Relief swelled in her chest as she saw them. Kiba was asleep, his chest bandaged, but Zenobia was wide awake. She was chatting with a woman who Rias alleged as the nurse. At least seemed to be. Her troubled expression stated otherwise, but that relief faded the moment she realized who the acting nurse was. Or rather, what demon species the nurse was. The leathery bat wings furled behind her exposed back were dead giveaway. Her brown hair was tied to a bun. Under the faint lighting, her dusky skin tone appeared darker. Her red lips curled to a smile, but there was something off-putting in her smile. An air of lust surrounded her voluptuous figure covered in daring purple cloth that revealed her cleavage and an unhealthy portion of her underboobs. Rias decided the woman was dangerously beautiful, fitting for a succubus. Rias and the rest were on the peak of their guard as the sultry demon strutted towards them with a gait that flaunted her rear. She suspected if this woman was placed in a town full of men, those men would start to kill each other just to look at her. Men? My, what have we here? Rias winced at the unhealthily seductive voice slipping off her lips as she studied them. More prey for me, master? The boy's too pretty for my taste, but the girl I like. She giggled darkly, suggestively, in a manner that easily put Zenobia on edge. I like muscly girls. On her bed, back against the wall, Zenobia shuddered. You're torturing the poor girl. They're guests, issei reminded. You can't consume guests' soul. It's not that I'd suck them dry. The succubus played a coy frown, waltzing around the armored man. HMMN. A shame. Perhaps you could be so kind and replace them? I imagine it would be very hot underneath these lumps of steel, not to mention unpleasant. Giggling, she traced a finger over his chest plate, feeling its rough metallic surface. It makes you untouchable. I don't quite like it, men. Ria's opinion regarding the mysterious man was lowered again when she heard his chuckles. Not even the feared enigma could resist the succubus's temptation. Not now, cat. Issei gently pushed the tittering succubus aside, making room for the only healer in the dungeon to move. Here's your people. Once you've healed them, they're staying here. Can we hold on to your words? They won't be harmed? You do realize you're surrounded by your enemies left and right. Your suspicion is understandable, but is it really a good idea to wave it around like a flag? Unless you want me to do something about it, that is. I can add a few more reason. Shutting the crimson-haired sorceress, issei nudged at the blonde holy maiden, gesturing her to work on her magical healing. The blonde girl moved once she received a clear from her leader, and moved gingerly around him and Kateria as she made way to a seat where the succubus was seated earlier. The invisible flow of magic gathered around Asia's palms as she placed her hands on the girl's sides. Soon after, soft lime green light emitted from the maiden's palm. Zenobia winced lightly as her muscle tissues mended and new threads of bone cells of her ribcage began to grow. The magic sped up a restoration that otherwise would take months and perhaps years to complete. From that, issei deducted she specialized in creation magic, a school of supportive spells. Possibly the only school of spells she learned, since being able to utilize more than one type of magic was considered a rare talent even for devils. As the girl moved on to the next patient, Rias decided to speak up. It doesn't reek stench of blood here. Was this room unused? You do know soaps exist, do you? Was Kat's sarcastic response. Otherwise it would reek of other more vulgar stench. 'Tis but a bed, after all. Rias winced. She became more cautious on her step and her hands since then. Aquino, on the other hand, found it funny, tittering along, earning the succubus smirk of approval. Most didn't make it here, issei replied, bringing back the much-needed seriousness. Or don't need to. The goblins have their own witch doctors, and the skeletons can revive themselves if given time. He didn't feel the need to share the information or mention his success in fending anyone from descending deep enough that he had yet to let loose of the elites. As for the wardens, all of them were stubborn save a handful few. Fight to win or die trying. To them, retreat was never an option. An honorable quality that issei deeply frowned upon. That heroic mentality had killed knights and lowly peasants that wanted to be heroes. The same persistence caused the second death of a warden during his watch. Unsatisfied with his vague answer, Rias pressed on, keeping watch of the seductive presence next to the man who seemed to be eyeing her bust. Are you the only human here? I don't recall mentioning I'm one, she frowned. He didn't take the bait. She was hoping he'd lower his guard and spill a little about his identity. The champion was here, right? Zenovia's voice. Rias couldn't blame her curiosity. She had always fancied the tales of the world's champion. And his demise. How far did he get? Too far enough. The enigmatic man responded. Did he die here? Yes. In a matter of speaking. He wasn't the same issei he was before entering this dungeon. I did. Again. In a matter of speaking. He was the one who murdered the champion. Another heavy silence, disturbed only by the succubus' carefree, quiet laughter, as though she knew something she didn't. Liar. Zenobia claimed as she sat up, not caring as the wool blanket draped off her chest, revealing her pair of breasts and perfectly toned stomach. She was definitely healthy, issei thought. Believe what you want. Oh, she's surprisingly brazen. She might actually be my type. At that, Zenobia quickly pulled the sheets over her firm breasts. Everyone is your type, Kateria. He scoffed, much to the succubus' mirth. What can I say? I cover broad subjects. Beneath his full-face helmet, a pair of brown eyes were rolled. Or you have a relatively low standard, and then perhaps I did bed you. It was done out of pity, don't lie to me. Kateria purred. You enjoyed it, not more than you did. Oh, you dare mock my performance? I'm getting on top tonight. You never let me have my fun, whined Issei. Rias and Kaneko were uncomfortable during that entire exchange. Even more when she found out her ravenet friend was actually giggling at their japes. As Asia had finished healing the unconscious swordsman, Issei turned at the two black orcs. Let's move on. The healer stays here. And me? Another gut feeling pinched her. Rias did not like this. Was he planning to separate them one by one? Did he intend to split her and her healer? They could fight effectively without swords, unlike Kiba or Zenobia. And without Asia's healing capability and her barriers, a fight would end with, guard them well, boys. The man's casual tones snatched her off her thoughts. If they try anything smart, well, just don't kill them. The blonde's a healer, not a necromancer. I boss. We'd be obliged. The two giant orcs grinned ear to ear, baring their jagged teeth, causing Asia to flinch. Are you sure you're not a necromancer, girlie? With arms crossed between her bust, Kateria asked the holy maiden. No! Asia cried, genuinely horrified. And necromancy isn't right? Oh my, an innocent soul. I am so going to enjoy her here. Kateria smirked. I hope they'll try something smart. I'd pay to see them squirm in their own blood. It's sort of poetic, don't you think? You and your broad taste. Issei muttered. Although the succubus words should be enough to keep them back in line. The rest of you, come with me. Bye-bye, master, bid Kateria, watching the keeper and the small band of misfits took their leave. I'll be sure to take care of these lovely children. Zenobia and Asia felt shivers down their spine as if the succubus had breathed down their neck. Break. His armor clanked as Issei took a seat by one of the benches, clasping his iron fingers as Rias and her group sat on the opposite side of the table. The great hall of the dungeon was eerily quiet for a room as grand. Unsurprisingly, as it was only used for a feast celebrating the crowning of a new warden. And there hadn't been any new wardens for the past year. Its gray stone walls ridden with cobwebs, and several succubi had to rekindle the dying flame of the torches attached on it, as well as the hearth. After they were done alighting the chilly room, Rias finally took notice of the constant cool air instead of a damp, hot, musty air a dungeon deep on earth would suggest. The air is oddly fresh, she muttered. It must be very deep. Aquino began as the succubi retreated into the pantry. The winds of magic are pure and abundant in here. When we were walking, I could almost feel it, see it in certain places. How many people have ever been this deep? She had talent, Issei observed. More than ordinary mages and seemingly more than the sorceress. In his former group of legends, out of 4 mages, only Motohama could see the concentrated lump of magic. He told him it was blue-colored. Mystical. Like a ghost. For the eyes for people without magical capabilities, like Issei's, they were invisible. Not many, fortunately enough, he replied. His voice was gratefully livelier, now that he wasn't brooding of his failure as much. You're the first guests of the dungeon's great hall. Oh my, I'm honored to be honored. Aquino tittered, and the man chuckled along as if they were friends already. You haven't told us your name. Normally, most people would tell me there's the moment we met. Great. Now she's flirting him as well. Much to Ria's distaste. The priestess of thunder was found easily likable by many and could befriend anyone, thanks to her kind and unjudging temperament. Rias would agree without a second thought. The problem was, she didn't know who the man is or was, and being reminded of her place as captives was grating her nerves. Most people don't live deep in the dungeon and have monsters ready to aid them. For that is true, I suppose you're quite the rare case. By Lilith. Rias would choose death than having to listen to this silly banter. Again. Kaneko seemed to agree, so she interjected. You said you would explain everything and answer any questions we have for you, and I will. He replied. Where do you want to start? Seeing your face would be appreciated. Aquino added. There was no hesitation, only the slight sound of his brown hair brushing against the insides of the helmet. Rias unconsciously held her breath for the big reveal as questions ran through Kaneko's head. Was he ugly? Scarred? Were his eyes heterochromatic? Missing an eye? A stump nose, perhaps? Kaneko was disappointed to find he was not the monster she thought he would be. No multicolored hair, just a dark brown that was few shades darker than his eyes. Almost as simple as his hair. No scar grazing either of his eyes, too. Only one small pink scar at the right side of his lips. A claw, she guessed. All she saw in him was a male human with a perpetually exhausted look on his face. Here she thought the leader of monsters would have mean-looking horns and orc-like canines for teeth. What a letdown, issei snorted. Have anyone mentioned how sharp your tongue is? If it's that easy to get you to reveal yourself, why didn't you take it off earlier? It builds curiosity, was his flippant answer. Akino's mellow hum seeped into the air, as she also took in his appearance. He wasn't a dashing perfect prince nor he was remarkably handsome, but this man wasn't without his own masculine charm. His thin unkempt stubble implied he didn't care much about his appearance. Rather than a debonair champion or a stalwart warrior, his look befitted more of an astute cell blade. He wouldn't be famously known for his looks, but for girls who wanted a manlier, gruffer-looking man who would be more likely to win battles than hearts, they'd surround him like ants to spilled sugar. She could imagine the battle scars beneath his armor-piece and frankly, her imagination was driving her wild. Rias noticed it, and she was very not amused. I had an inkling you would be the ruggedly handsome type, she said as a sly smile crossed her face and infected his. Can we have your name next? Issei. Issei. It's been a long time since anyone called me with either. Mostly it's boss or master. Their smiles disappeared and the great hall went quiet then. Quieter than the warden's sending off Rieger. No, Rias whispered, her crimson eyebrows scrunching. That's the champion's first and family name. We asked for yours? Well, it is mine. You can't possibly be the champion. Instead of taking offense, Issei chuckled instead. The sound was surprisingly warm for a man who led a legion of terrifying monsters. If I get a sovereign for every time someone said that I could pay everyone here with a bag each. Not that they'll have any use for money. There needed to be a shop that wouldn't discriminate purchasing monsters first. Why? Am I not handsome enough or not chivalric enough? The champion was sent here on purpose to slay the Rias stumbled to find the proper term to address the abominations in fear of offending their leader. Monsters, Issei said with simplicity. That's what they are. Like I'm a human. They don't fuss about it, and neither should any of you. Rias made a mental note at that. If she ever offended any of the monsters, at least she had their leader to point finger at. It was then another succubus waltzed in. Her outfit barely covered any skin, as it was meant to be. She appeared younger than the previous one, but no less stimulating. They always had that sensual swagger when they walk. The black-haired demoness placed a tray containing 3 mugs of water and another mug of what Rias could only tell as an ale. About time. She saw the man smiled at the succubus and her tits. Thank you, Rainer. Any time, master. The girl tittered, strutting away after giving Rias and the other girls a sneering smirk. New faces today. There are 3 others. Kateria's with them. What? That's not fair. She gets to play while I have to stand here and watch? No one's stopping you from joining. And Rainer glimpsed at the 3 females. It was a quick glance, but she saw the serious look on the devil. On second thought, I'll just stand over there. This seems to be more fun. As the succubus went back to her spot and floated into a bed made of air while staring at them, Rias mentally shook her head. Their relationship certainly wasn't limited to leader and follower. Speaking of which, are you their leader? She asked. They nominate their own leaders. Those leaders happen to work with me. Work? Kaneko finally raised her own question. The champion didn't work with monsters. Issei raised an eyebrow. The champion's dead. Or did you not get the implied meaning and I should stop being ambiguous from now on? Oh dear. He was sarcastic as well. Akino had a thing for sarcastic people, and it made Rias very worried. I like enigmatic people. Rias almost gave in to her urge of burying her face. Way to be subtle, Akino, and I like direct people. Issei grinned, bending the scar on his lips. Oh? But I can be quite mysterious too. I may have a dark and troubled past. A tragic backstory. Supposedly a parental issue or 2. I might be encumbered with so many problems, and this smile of mine is nothing but a farce. Really? Perhaps we can find out whose past is darkest, and wash it down with a fine summer wine. It was as if the only one sane here was limited to her and Kaneko. Was this the dungeon's effect? She knew some dungeons could make a healthy devil turn insane by staying there for too long. Her fallen angel friend appeared to be under its effect. Before they could impregnate each other with their banters and stares, Rias interjected. By work, what do you mean? I don't dawdle here aimlessly. And neither do the monsters. We're here because there's something we need to guard. His expression became sterner. If I tell you what it is, the chance of you getting out of here alive will slim down. His brown eyes shone as he eyed the priestess. Slimmer than her waist. That considerably tore down the threat. I do mean what I said. And his face was cold again, eyes unflinching. I'll tell you this much, it's not trihexa. If you want to keep hearing it still, then fine. Just keep in mind that there's a catch. Rias glanced at her companions in her moment of indecision. Alone, she would refuse. Survival was her main concern, and learning what she was not meant to learn despite her piqued curiosity was something she'd rather avoid. But with her friends? They could change her mind. You mentioned we're no use to you dead. What are you planning to do to us? Oh, I can think of some ways even if you're dead. It's just that you're more useful alive. And then she recalled about a quest she took. She was to rescue a party of adventurers who was ambushed by goblins. When she and her group arrived at their hideout, and wiped away all of the green-skinned atrocities, she found the males were used as shooting target, and the women they were alive. But they wished they had died. Their eyes were staring without looking, hollow and empty. Her stomach churned. If you're going to send us to the goblins to be used as she couldn't complete the sentence. I'd rather die. What? The young man looked horrifically distraught at the realization. He had forgotten how savage the monsters outside the dungeon could be. No. Don't you ever mention that to the orcs here, especially Grimger. They won't stop until they've skinned every single goblin they can find out there. She was unprepared for the rush of relief she felt, as well as the guilt for labeling all monsters lacked integrity. But I thought there's no female goblins? Isn't that why they kidnap females? Issei stared at the white-haired fighter. Their females are weaker than the male and less violent, though they're just as green. Out there in the wild, power means everything, and females can't keep up with the males. They mostly stay in their hole waiting for their partners or children to return. In most cases, either came back. Rias regretted asking. By Lilith, how many goblin sons and husbands had she killed? I think I feel sick. Kaneko muttered. Mind you that I'm only speaking for the goblins and orcs here. Issei spoke with nonchalance. I felt the same way when I first found out. You were doing what you have to do, as were they. Are the monsters here different compared to those outside? Issei nodded as he took a swig of his ale. He dropped the mug with a loud thud. They are. They haven't tried killing you yet, did they? Yet. Rias quoted. Where else can you find monsters that are willing to serve the people that hunts them day and night? He sniggered. It amused him how they squirmed when they were uncomfortable. Outside, most monsters were born and lived to survive and thrive. Here, they only have a sole purpose, and that purpose is protecting something we're not allowed to know. Oh, you're allowed to know. With a cost. Issei added. A pricey one, I admit. Our lives. Rias grudgingly uttered. Issei shrugged. In one way or another. You're a smart girl. You'd understand. We've just met and you already know me? He smirked lightheartedly, though slightly mockingly because he found her honest expressions funny. The champion did meet many people, didn't he? Or did they gloss over that in the story and went for the more interesting bits? I bet they skipped on how many brothels the champion had paid a visit to keep his chaste image. They didn't mention the champion is a satirical sex addict either. Kaneko said with an edge in her voice. This time with a small, amused smile. It took a fellow sardonic person to acknowledge another. Did they? Did they keep the part where the champion stole a cookie from a fat, chubby boy in a village somewhere to the east? All eyes were widened with resigning disbelief. You did that? Rias asked. I didn't. But I wish I did. Spoken without a sliver of shame. He is really fat for a village boy. His arm looked like two clay pots taped together. She still found the pill of the world champion is actually a contemptible person hard to swallow. Then again, so did all truth. Decidedly, Rias skipped over that bit. What do you have to prove you're the champion? To her surprise, he laughed as if she was a small child asking silly things. Proof? Why should I bother? I never said I'm a champion. Some people with influence pointed their finger at me and forced me to wear it like a badge. I've slain adventurers like yourself and planted their head on a stake to act as scarecrows. I'm nothing but a murderer with a shiny badge. Doesn't sound like something a champion would do, does it? Right. They were reminded once again that he wasn't the ideal hero everyone believed. Surely something had happened. Rias deducted, stubborn in her faith. If you are or were the champion, what made you change your mind? Was it the beast's influence? Beast? What beast? Issei said mockingly. If you're speaking about Trihexa, he's no longer here. Did you slay him? No. God did, apparently. And Issei finished his drink. This is as far as you can ask if you still want to leave sooner. Ignorance is bliss, haven't you heard? Not knowing makes you not caring. But then, the devil surprised him by the sharp change of her expression. Once curious, now hard and bitter. I'd rather learn the truth than live in an illusion. Issei raised an eyebrow as he studied the look of the devil's two companion. Those silent, sympathetic looks said enough. I see you've had your share of gloomy, bitter pasts. Whatever happened to you, Miss Red Devil? Their surprised faces amused him greatly. The residents of the dungeon were all too unteasable and stolid. There were the succubi, but they always teased him back before then heading into his bed. Why, you knew? Rias gasped, before continuing. Of course you knew, I go around often. Supernatural beings just have that kind of air, I guess. His spaulders made a noise as Issei hunched his shoulders. What happened? Did the devils claw each other's faces again? Rias nodded. He noted that the mood had taken a somber turn. He took it that whatever happened up there in the surface, it wasn't much of good news, and I'm guessing your family's been hurt. Betrayed? Stabbed in the back? Rammed in the ass? The sorceress' expression turned into one of sorrow. Yes, then don't keep us in suspense. Issei humored. Humor had become his way of coping with, well, pretty much everything. I'd like to hear about the whole thing that has been happening or had happened up there since last year. There were only so much Fener's wolves could do with information gathering, more so as their numbers weren't as great. Get too close to the city, and they'd be hunted for their furs. Their last information was that a chief of the nearest village often made late-night rendezvous with the baker's wife. First, Rias began, after the disappearances of the legendary adventurers, there was a vacuum of power in the guilds they led or was once a part of. Many advanced guilds decided to disband to honor their leaders. The prominent adventurers either enrolled into their race's military or became a sellsword. Some even completely hanged their weapons. The new guilds didn't make it far due to the lack of professionals' help. And the lack of manpower. If you remember the last group of people that went here, they were a member of the only guild of the nearest city. With their leader dead, and most of their members aren't in shape, I doubt it'd be long before they disband. She frowned. A city without adventurers' guild. It's not a rare occurrence, but it doesn't make it any less sad, considering how things were. Rias muttered. She recalled a time when guilds used to compete with each other while helping any guilds in need. Well, excepting the shady ones? The kinds that would hurt a baby for money, but they weren't an adventurer guild in her book. Nothing but cutthroats. At the present, becoming an adventurer is seen as a desperate last resort to stay alive. I suppose, hope died with the champion. Rias glanced at him to see how he would respond. His face was unreadable at best. Stoic even. Well, isn't that sad? His nonchalant, dismissive tone irked even Kaneko. People had faith in you. Rias cried out, slapping her palms on the table without thinking. You're the first human to be given aid by a heavenly dragon and the first human to be the leader of dozens legendary adventurers. Many people aspired to become half of the man you are, and you were loved. How could you throw it all away? Despite her sudden harsh tone, Issei kept his civil. He was almost apathetic when he replied. Would you believe me if I tell you I didn't ask to be here? Rias minded her rampant emotions afterwards, looking remorseful. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, I'm here doing all these spiteful things for this world's sake. Not mine. At least that's what I want to think I'm doing. He'd rather not think of those scarecrows made from the dead bodies. If I'm going to continue about this, you know what's going to happen, right? It was their last chance to turn a deaf ear. They realized that, and was contemplating their choices. Good. He didn't have to feel awfully responsible for these people regardless of what they picked. After a moment of discussion that lasted him his beer, Rias looked at him. We've slain this dungeon's monsters. Including a minotaur that seemed to be a being of value here. What's dead is dead. It's their proverb or something of the sort. You didn't know, and they're just doing what they're tasked to," Issei replied. "As long as you don't pry around their stuffs or poke them with a stick too much, they won't introduce you to their fists. Try not to kill anyone. The last thing you want hunting your hide is a furious ever-chosen. The big and mean-looking guy back there. Large horns, oh of course." Rias nervously agreed, becoming ever so fearful of the champion instead of being filled with admiration or joy of meeting him in person. Hiding things from him would be a very unwise move. As you might have guessed, I'm a fugitive. We're all fugitives. The civil war is still raging, I believe. I was out of the continent when it happened, and when I learned that my family was betrayed, she was struggling. If Issei wasn't the cynical man he was now, he might even feel sorry for her. I'm the last of my line. Rias raised her face. She had accepted that as a fact, which was praiseworthy in his opinion. I am hunted by the devils, so I fled north. As for my friend's eye, it's not your fault, Rias. We understand. Akino's encouragement was what she needed. Kaniko's small smile was much appreciated. We haven't been able to stay in the same place longer than a week. Her party must have been dragged into her predicament. Perhaps they met before the civil war broke out. That'd explain her guilty expression from earlier. If you're asking me to deal with them outside, it's a no from me. There are already enough misled reasons for people to rid this place. Spawning monsters is not one of them, and I want it to stay that way. If your pursuer comes here, however, they can be dealt with. I see Rias allowed a smile to break through. That's a relief. She had it rough. As did many people, but he commended her for that. Not all people were born a noble and fell from grace. So, do you accept? I don't speak for neither Asia, Zenobia, or Kiba. They can make their stand later on. Though your group seems like the kind that sticks around with you even if you grow an extra pair of hands. Or lose one. Rias smiled more radiantly now, despite his quip. Thank you? They do mean a lot to me. He wasn't good at this heartfelt, touching feelings things. Too complicated. Make him feel all weird. He wasn't as horrid as his traveling dragon companion, but he'd rather not get tangled with it. Then do I have your word? The crimson-haired sorceress glanced at her two companions before she made their decision. Yes, good. That settles it then. Issei finally allowed a smile to appear on his features that once was the face of an innocent though perverted-minded boy, long years before he became a brutal, controversial de facto leader of the dungeon. We haven't introduced ourselves. Rias said. I'm Rias Gremory, Himejima Akino. Pleased to meet you, Sir Champion Nufufu, Tuja Kaniko. The small fighter muttered, bowing lightly. A girl of few words she seemed to be. Triss could and should learn from her. Nice to meet you too. Just Issei or Hiatus is fine. Issei bobbed his head. Right, let's get this over with. The reason why I haven't resurfaced should be obvious. People think I'm dead and that's all they need to know. Why I'm here even though there's no trihexa in sight, is to prevent him from popping out. Popping out? Rias repeated confusedly. This man says the weirdest of wordings. Yes. That's what Great Red told me. Great Red? Rias gasped. He's here? Was. Issei corrected. Remember last year? The Great Venture or whatever, some of us made it here. We killed him, because we thought he was trihexa. There was a long pause and a long stare. What? How? You're the loud one, aren't you? Fitting your hair. Issei grumbled, causing Rias to blush. Well, excuse me for having never seen an apocalyptic beast. And no, it wasn't you killed the Great Red? I apologize for my illiteracy, but what exactly is a Great Red? Akino asked innocently. Kaniko looked as out of the loop as her. A giant dragon. Issei said. Very, very large dragon. And very red. Both Akino and Kaniko didn't appear less puzzled, only more disappointed. He's the apocalypse dragon. It's rumored that when apocalypse comes, an enormous dragon will appear alongside Trihexa and wage war against the entire world. But you killed him how? Dragons die if you stab them enough times, apparently. Issei dryly commented. He meant no ill respect towards the deceased. Hopefully he wouldn't have to clarify that he had no filter for his words, the daily struggles of a bitter, sarcastic person. And don't look at me as if I'm a historian. I don't know more about it than you do either. Oh, okay, Akino spoke her mind. You weren't alone here then? You were with a large party, weren't you? We lost plenty going down here. Then Red took down some more. And then I guess I finished the rest. Rias and her group froze in shock. Why you killed them? The sorceress managed. You killed your own allies? They were no longer my allies. Issei believed. There was a black orb in that large cave. It was a seal containing the Big Bad. Part of the Big Bad. There's 5 more somewhere in this world, supposedly protected. If those stones are gathered, then something very bad will happen. Like a very angry trihexa, Red was protecting that stone. And a girl. As long as she's alive, even if those stones have been gathered, it's not over. Issei stressed. For once, he appeared dead serious. Remorseful, even. You'll see her sooner or later, but you best not touch her. You don't want to accidentally kill yourself. I'll keep that in mind. There was silence again as Rias thought of other questions. How are you sure the dragon was the Great Red? Aquino asked. Well, other than the fact he was great and red, Issei sniggered, recalling the dragon's words. He had no reason to lie. And dragons can't lie. They're apparently made of honor and a very thick skin. I took his mantle or duty, whatever. My dead friends refused to. They prefer stabbing me to get out and turn in the quest and enjoy the reward, hence why they're dead. Sirius muttered sadly. I'm sorry, I can't imagine what you've been through. Considering the circumstances, it's not that bad. I just had to jam a sword into a few friends I knew since I could barely lift a wooden sword. Issei lifted his mug of ale and looked inside it. He frowned as he found it was empty. Meanwhile, Rias and company was having a hard time on how to react to his morbid sense of humor, always having to be the hero. That's my lifetime struggle. He smirked despite the irony. I'm still getting used to it, I understand. To an extent. Rias smiled bitterly. What do you need us do, for now? Nothing much. You've been spelunking here. Clean yourselves and get some rest. Poke around if you want. They wouldn't be able to go upstairs anyway. Otherwise, you can talk to your 3 other people and see if they want to try living in a cave. Aquino giggled. Issei cast a side glance at the succubus floating in a lying position, a palm underneath her chin as she watched him with obvious interest. She frowned, however, when he continued, She'll cast a spell on you. You won't be able to use your magic and your companion's weapons will be taken away until I feel comfortable enough having new people here. Rainier will provide your rooms. You can have your separate rooms or you can all huddle up like one big family if you want to. The rooms have beds, of course. You'll have food and drinks. I'll have some monsters stationed outside, so you best be quiet if you're feeling frisky, unless you want it to be heard, that is. Rias took a while to figure out the crude joke, and was disgruntled by knowing. We'll grumble more about it on the morrow. Issei stood up, taking his mug along with him, and left into a corridor where the succubi emerged earlier. She first wanted to think he wasn't going to do those succubi, but Rainier's apparent longing and jealousy made her drop a sigh. Well then, you ladies, don't just stand there. The succubus ushered, come here so I can enchant you. Rias looked nervously at Aquino, then at Kaneko, and another look full of doubt at Rainier, the black-haired succubus with black leathery wings, gazing at them with a mischievous smile. Trusting her was the easiest decision she had to make so far. As the succubus cast waved her finger, purple light bathed the 3 of them, swirling to form a purple tattoo-like markings around their neck. It was a feeling hard to describe, losing the ability to cast magic, but Rias felt it. Aquino felt it. Like missing a limb, if she had to put it. Odd, Rainier muttered as she looked quizzically at the small girl, who also had the same purple markings on her neck. Oh. Never mind. What is it? Kaneko asked out of interest. I thought you're just a small human girl. Turns out you're not human to begin with. Still small though, it was an obvious jeer. Kaneko wasn't sure if she should try striking the succubus, but in her head, she was. And men, you don't like being called small, do you? A problem I can't relate to. Now Kaneko really wanted to hit her. At least tug one of her wings. Oh well. I'll have your rooms ready. Go see your people. When you're done, you might find me bouncing on his crotch. Goodbye. Seeing the succubus disappear with the same light the champion had when he transported them, Rias uttered aloud, so this is it, our new life. She turned to her friends. Are you too sure of this? It's too late to turn back now, but don't be silly. We've been together for years. Aquino giggled. If I leave, you'll miss me. I don't know anywhere else to go, honestly. Kaneko whispered. She was much more honest, and much more disheartening without realizing it. I'm glad I have you both on my side. Rias allowed herself a smile. Now let's see the others and hope we won't need say goodbye. Ah. Harder, master. Harder. NNNNH. The hall suddenly felt hotter as lust-riddled voices began to seep from the kitchen area. I have never thought our world champion would be a man so debauched of fufu. I wonder how Zenobia will react to this. Can we leave now? Please? Yes. Ria stiffly replied. Let's. And thus marked her first day as a retainer of the last guardian, the keeper of the dungeon, and apparently the pleasurer of the succubi. It's been gnawing me lately. Where will you keep those people? It was the curious query of the father of wolves, who happened to be the keeper's advisor and the dungeon's aptly titled spymaster, as he was during Great Red's watch. Holding some as hostages may assure compliance, but rarely if ever loyalty. Scouts. 3 or 4 while the rest stays. Issei told him. He had made his mind since the last he spoke to them that afternoon. They can enter cities without being hunted. They can stay together without causing much hassle. What was their rank again? Gold. Right. That didn't help. Why would he bother learning about adventurers and their silly ranks? Issei assumed it meant they're better than average. They should be capable enough to handle themselves. They did. Didn't they show promise back then? Issei snorted. What you call fending off a wave of goblins and skeletons promising? A little. It's hard to stay focused with all the screeching and the bones clicking and such. Fener quipped. Do you trust them? Fener off-puttingly asked as the two took a turn into a passage. Somewhat, Issei replied, scratching his jaw. They're far from their home and are on the run. Kateria's prying them some more just to be sure. Shouldn't be hard for her. The priestess, or whatever job she has, doesn't look resistant. And if she somehow managed to stay quiet, the blue-haired one looked like she was going to cry. Really? The sword-wielding one? Yeah. She was highly uncomfortable around Kateria. That's odd. You tell me. Issei agreed. Their families are likely dead. The devil's a noble was a noble. Some kind of civil war broke out among her kind and her house was apparently betrayed. She's a fugitive now, along with her band of sisters. If they willingly listen to her, they'll likely be the honorable bunch. The one for all and all for one kind of people. Fener laughed. If we treat her well, gain her trust, the rest will follow. Issei concluded. For now, I need your wolves to keep watch. I don't trust any of them enough to come near her. Her who? Triss. You told them? Fener looked exactly the same when he learned someone had eaten his preserved curse boar meat. Only the unnaturals or supernaturals. The devil probably told them already or is going to tell them. Just assume that they do. Fener shook his head. Not in understanding, but because there was little he could do now. What plan do you have in mind? He had only served the current keeper for a year, but he knew of his tendency and capability to create intricate, convoluted schemes a master schemer would be proud of. After all, why would he divulge the presence of Trihex's soul-bearer? See if they're smart enough to not try and stir things up themselves. I've met people who would do heroic stuffs thinking they control what will happen next. Issei received a cynical look. Fener's eyes were narrowed a little. Seems to me all these heroes your people fantasize about are always reckless. Well, not all of them. That would be a shithole. But some do. About under a half. Maybe. Which half do you see yourself in? Me? Issei gave a mocking laugh. You know I've never seen myself as one, and yet you're the champion. That's no meager title bestowed randomly, isn't it? That's only what they wanted to hear. When they're desperate enough, they'll need something to believe in. Like believing it'll rain tomorrow when it's been nothing but a blazing summer for months. Fener scoffed. Rather meek-minded way of thinking. I agree, but can you blame them? Not everyone can defend themselves or their family when a horde of whatever those things are came by ramming their front door. They'll cling to that last bit of hope, even when it's obvious no help will come. They could have done something to prevent it. Some storms came without warning, Fener. Not if you have someone to constantly watch the weather, but I see your point. Fener nodded, finally understanding the human shortcomings, such as being simply not cut to fend a horde of rampaging monsters by themselves. I'll put this thought aside for the time being. Yeah. It's not something you have to think long and hard though. Issei surmised. He doubted the mighty father of wolves who had the appetite of a dozen wolves could be sympathetic towards the unfortunate. Have you told your wolves yet? Ah, yes. Fener extended the orders to his underlings. Being able to send orders without much effort sure was convenient. Returning to our earlier discussion, now with their upcoming role determined, what about their present ones? If you don't plan to keep them as hostage, they'll have to earn their stay, Archeon. The two gave Archeon a nod as the ever-chosen of chaos passed by. His towering build eclipsed the light of the torches behind him. A being of few words, he was. It complemented his enormous build nicely. The blonde can heal. Give her something to heal, issei said in an uncomplicated manner. You can take her hunting with your pack, but you'll need someone to watch over her. The rest can be sparring partners to whoever wants to for the time being. If they're staying, they'll have to get used to this place. They were adventurers, after all, and unlike him, they weren't legends. Living and breathing nearby strong, powerful monsters that could rip heads apart was known to spur anxiety. I suppose combats against real adventurers provides valuable knowledge. We're fortunate to get them, issei said. From what they told me, seems that the world's running out of decent adventurers. That explains why we haven't had many guests as of late. Let's not jinx it. It went silent for a while, until issei huffed through his nose. It was a sigh. How long do you think it'll take until she realizes this? She? Triss. Possibly after she wakes up. That means tomorrow by dawn. That's not what I meant. Then what is it? What are you on about? I can communicate through minds, not read it. The spars. Issei paused his steps, pulling Fener into a halt as well. She'll finally have an actual sparring partner that she can measure her strength with. Fener gave the keeper a look of surprise. You knew? Of course I knew. It was clear that issei was a bit offended. I may look like one at times, but I'm not daft. The wolf pondered for a moment, staring at issei's face, trying to read his expression which he couldn't be bothered to understand. Was it obvious? There's a black spot on Drake's scale earlier, said issei plainly. Somehow it always appears whenever I have to go up there when I'm not around. Strange, eh? Fener huffed. She does need to protect herself, boss. You can't deny her that. If what the devil said is true, then she direly needs it. Outside, turmoil is spreading. With the devils clawing each other, the Fallens might take the opportunity and wage war against them. Opportunistic kings from the Empire might even try to subjugate them as well. Their continents are rich in precious metals and oil. Two things your kind seems to have taken a liking to. My kind? Wait, issei jeered. The Holy Empire, you mean? What, with all of their gods' will and whatnots? Exactly them. The blue-gray wolf said dourly. They're far more advanced than the others and worse. They've sworn to set aside any needless wars and concentrate their forces in the unholy infestations in the east before they ultimately change focus to the Muslim Caliphate. They're united, boss. They outnumber all other nations. They have heroes and gunpowder. Two resources dangerous enough on their own, and now they have the support of heaven. What are you getting at here? They're advanced, but I doubt they're confident to face the devil's magic at their strongest. The underworld and the Grigori are the reason why they haven't expanded their border to this land. Should they fall or fell themselves, there's a healthy chance the Empire will try to invade and conquer them. It will only be a matter of time before they reclaim Hispania afterwards. And I suspect, rumors of hidden riches alone are enough reason for them to conquer this dungeon in the process. Your kind is never lacking in brave souls. Fener took a break to study the keeper's reaction. So far, not much had changed. He still carried a certain air of ease. That's concerning, issei said apathetically. Fener couldn't lie. His keeper's lax attitude pissed him off at times. Indeed. But should that day come, you must be prepared. Remember that this place is not, and should not become your highest importance. I know. I'll get her out of here even if I have to sacrifice all of you. Issei sighed. Why do you have to make things so depressing? Simply accounting for the possibilities, boss. The wolf continued, easing his tone. The only faction that can stand against them alone are the Olympians, and that's only if they refrain themselves from biting each other in the back, which is as likely as you are to refrain yourself from pleasure. That unnecessary jest earned him a sidelong glance. A man has needs. Your needs are inhumane. Well, don't look at me. I'm not the succubus. Yes, but they don't require seducing you to get you to plow them. Issei paused. Plow? But I suppose, with all the weights you hold on your shoulders, to say you are undeserving of your questionable coping method would be wrong. Coping? Issei laughed. That's what you think I was doing? Fener, my friend, I just like sex. Fener's groan echoed throughout the long corridor as a few snickers could be heard coming from the monsters passing the corridors. Seeing them walking in the same direction as theirs made him recall why they were walking. Have some idea on what to say. Issei's expression turned flat. The usual. Inspiring brave soul. His death will not be in vain. All of that. I'll have Toros doing the rest. Other might think of this man as heartless, but Fener had stayed by his side long enough to understand the keeper rarely expressed what he felt verbally. He'd hide it until he was truly alone, where he could then be gloomy for all he wanted to until Triss or Drake or any of the succubi bothered him. Rieger didn't die so that you can take his duty. Issei's voice was quiet and solemn. Right. Duties. I guess it's also his duty to die in my watch, Issei, he scoffed. Right. I shouldn't hit myself. You don't have to tell me twice. I'll tell you as many times it is needed until you stop grueling yourself. The Father of Wolves ended as the two arrived at the dungeon's end, where those defending the dungeon had gathered to honor the fallen Minotaur, lying still upon a funeral pyre. Next to him, Taurus stood wielding a great axe that once was his brother's. Break. Aquino had known Rias for years, and she might know her better than she knew herself. It was easy to tell whenever her devil friend felt anything. Happy, sad, curious, unsure. She rarely ever successfully hid her feelings. At least when she knew it was fine to do so. Something Aquino found she was quite envious about. What's bothering you, Rias? She asked, causing the crimson-haired sorceress to flinch on her simple wooden chair. You haven't said anything since we got here. Rias exhaled a deflating sigh. I don't know. She raised from her seat, pondering around her new bedroom. It had its own charm, to say the least. Most of the furniture was made of wood and leather, and touch of steels here and there. Definitively handcrafted. Do you think this is right? Did I make a rash decision? You should have done this before you decide something. I mean it. I'm serious, she giggled guiltlessly. You're always serious, Rias. Rias sighed again. I feel like I'm dragging all of you into something I shouldn't have again. We didn't mind the first time, or the second, or the later that follows. What makes you think we'll mind now? Aquino, why did she like to push her buttons so much? Probably because she could get away with it. Aquino smiled an easy smile. Would you have said something different then? It's not like you have much choice either. And we're still alive too. That's always a good sign, HM? I just can't help it. After pacing around nervously, Rias finally sat down at her bed. It made a little creak. Who knows how long we're going to be here? Or what he's planning to make us do, or how long he's planning to keep us alive. You don't trust him? I do and I don't. It's complicated. Even though he's the champion? Was the champion? Another giggle. Maybe not anymore, but the world looked up to him once. I don't see him as someone who would throw it all away for nothing. Yes, there's that girl and that gem. And even Great Red, Rias muttered. Maybe I just have to see it for myself. Get rid of this indecision. Yes, that'll be a good idea. Maybe if you ask him nicely he'll show you. Rias sighed yet again. Mad at sighing a lot. You're too carefree, Aquino. I wish everything is as simple. Why shouldn't it? Everything can be simple or complicated, depends on how you look at it. All I know is that we're a group of outlawed misfits who now have a place to stay. They even have underground hot springs. Rias agreed on that part. Luxury was something she had to forcibly given up long ago. We might be restricted, and constantly watched by big burly monsters, true, but aren't you a little bit tired of running? Rias looked at her best friend. Of course Aquino wasn't as simple-minded. She knew. She handled things differently and rather coolly. Or maybe she was just simple-minded. Either way, Rias agreed with her this time. You're right. Maybe I am overthinking again. I just hope others can handle this change. Getting off her bed, Aquino sat beside the troubled devil. When it comes to physical intimacy, Aquino liked to get close and personal. Thankfully it was restricted to people she knew more than just acquaintances. You keep forgetting we're here because of you. I don't want to make it sound as if we're indebted to you or we're doing this to repay you, we're just grateful, Rias. We've been together for a long time. I doubt any of us would know what to do if we separate ways if we don't have you to bark orders at us. Rias allowed a smile and a giggle. A bashful one, accompanied with a light blush. Thanks, you're so cute. She teased. She got off not much later, seemingly not in the mood for sleep yet. Where are you going? Taking a look around. She said it as if there weren't two black orcs guarding outside their room. I don't think I'll get a wink of sleep anytime soon. He didn't say anything about staying in this room, did he? He even said it's okay to poke around. This was that part of carefreeness that Rias didn't like. He might be lenient, but don't push it. I'll ask him very nicely. Thus, Aquino swung open the door. Rias only hoped the orcs guarding them would let her off easy. Ask him what, exactly? Hearing her friend's gasp, Rias turned to the door, and lo and behold, a blue-gray furred wolf was staring right at Aquino's face. His body was twice larger than the wolf she saw in the infirmary, and the size of his head was the size of Aquino's torso, which was large. Oh my! Aquino took a surprised step back. How do you do? The wolf said, without opening his mouth. I'm Fener. Fener? Yes. He then shrunk his body to a more room-friendly appearance as he entered, albeit still somewhat bigger than an ordinary wolf. He didn't want to accidentally set his tail on fire again like that time he spent some time to accompany the little lass, Triss. I'm here to ask if you are well accommodated. We are, thank you, but Rias anxiously moved closer to Aquino. Fenrir? Yes. I'm Fenrir. That's my name. It's Fenrir Sulfur, but that one's a mouthful. You may call me by Fenrir or Fenris. I see, but how are you here? There's a hallway. It connects places. That's not what I mean. Rias had to remind herself to keep her tone civil. It was harder to be done when something as grand as meeting the legendary father of wolves happened to her. Aren't you, and pardon me if I'm being rude, supposed to be in the north? Fenrir tilted his head like a common canine. Why's that? Oh my, you're adorable, Aquino said. I appreciate it. Fenrir kept a straight face and his tone calm, yet his wagging tail that thudded against the smooth cavern floor betrayed him. Both Aquino and Rias had the urge to squeal. Rias cleared her throat. I just didn't expect to see you this far southeast. We're in Spain, aren't we? His expression darkened and his tail stopped moving. I serve no purpose staying in Valhalla. There are far better things I can do here than being falsely accused as one who wished to commit murder upon the old man with only one working eye. That hit a sore spot, Rias thought. Best to not mention it again for the time being. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, Fenrir sighed. No. It was my fault for losing my temper. My apologies. Old scars may hurt sometime. Oh wow, your fur is very soft. Fenrir only noticed the girl with the longer hair had her hand rubbing his head when she made a voice. Being mad must had lowered his guard. What are you doing? I'm petting you. She replied obviously. Aquino! I'm very sorry, Sir Fenrir. What for? This is nice, Fenrir said, tail furiously wagging. I see now why my pack enjoy this gesture. Albeit I can't help to feel slightly embarrassed. Rias didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know how Aquino got away with it too. Then tell me, woman, what question did you want to ask to the keeper? The keeper? Rias repeated, sitting herself on the edge of her bed. Yes. Keeper of the dungeon. Issei hiatus, or hiatus issei. What question did you want to ask him? Rias appeared conflicted, unsure if she was in any position to ask questions. She wasn't sure of her current position either. Aquino stopped paying attention long since. Too busy petting the almighty father of wolves with ungodly soft pelt. I was told he has told you the matter regarding the girl. She quickly pieced his sentence. Yes, about her. I'm guessing she's a seal? Part of a seal, Fenrir corrected. Likely to be the crucial part. Has he told you about the soulstones? He might refer to them as ugly black rocks. Rias nodded. That he did, I suppose, Fenrir continued. Some truths are harder to believe than a simple lie, and hard truth cuts both ways, she muttered quietly as she recalled her father's words. Pardon me? It's nothing. Rias quickly played it off. But if that's the truth, then why don't you take her to a safe place? Surely one of the nations, if not all, want to prevent Trihexa's second return. Who do you think sent all of those people here in the first place to kill Trihexa, young miss? Rias froze. No, it can't be. The entire world wanting to trigger the resurrection? Have they gone mad? It's possible they didn't know. Why would anyone want to bring something that evil back to Earth? Who can tell? If there's anything I've learned in my time living above ground, is that there are beings who equals danger as opportunity. I'm not surprised if some thought they're able to influence Trihexa to do their biddings, but that's nearly all of the nations. All of them sent their best. Does that include the kingdom of heaven as well? They might not, they might too. I know as much as you do now, young miss. Your guess is as good as mine, Fenrir completed. What I do know factually is that there is no other place safer than this dungeon. It has been so for years and years, from the first crusades to the last. All of its residents intend to keep it that way. I hope you and your friends intend to do nothing less. That was a warning. Rias felt the same pressure from earlier, as the air seemingly grew heavier, and Aquino had stopped doing what she was doing. Thank you for the caresses. They were quaint. Fener stood up from his canine sitting posture. I apologize for souring the air, young missus. I am concerned for her safety, is all. If you'll excuse me, I bid you a good night rest. As he walked out the door, Fener returned to his original body size, becoming as tall as the black orcs even on his forelegs. He looked at the two black orcs, talking to them telepathically, on which they replied with a rough, indiscernible grunt. Gingerly, Aquino shut the door, laying her back against the wooden body afterwards. Well, at least we know a little more of something. Yeah, I guess. Rias sighed heavily. I forgot who he was until that. Me too. Appearance can be deceiving. Aquino giggled. He's still very cute though. Rias ignored her last comment as she laid herself down on the mattress. She stared at the craggy ceiling as her mind wandered elsewhere. To the girl, in particular. Assuming the worst, she wondered how unpleasant it was to be hunted everywhere. Most devils probably wanted her dead, and perhaps some bounty hunters. But that was most devils and some bounty hunters, not the entire world. Rias rolled over just in time as Aquino opened the door again. You're still going out? Aquino hummed lightly. I'm still not sleepy. Are you coming along? Rias played a smile. No thanks. I'm a bit tired. Okay then, good night. Don't you get lonely without me. She giggled as Aquino left the room for herself. Her smile waned not much after. Nostalgia and the what could have been had always come to visit her whenever she was alone. She had a family before. She had a home she could always come back to, with loving, bordering, doting parents always waiting for her. A life before all of it gone wrong. She had everything she never thought she would want so badly, now that all of it was taken away from her. All was taken for granted, Rias supposed. Regrets comes later, as it always has, and it haunted her every night. Break. The pyre had turned to ash, as did Rieger's body. Ashes, that was what Fener said all of the creatures here came from. From the ashes of their dead. Whatever that backward riddle meant, he supposed it was poetic. It did fit the whole ashes to ashes, or whatever smart quotes people say to sound remotely smart. Why were you still here? Just to suffer? I'm not. You just think I am. Then why are you still standing here? Staring at a pile of ashes won't bring him back. You're a pile of ass. Ha! Very smart, very. Issei scoffed. Something you must be feeling in those days, didn't you? Drake paused to digest the remark. He didn't catch it. What are you on about? Issei sighed out loud as Drake trotted next to him. In the large cavernous area that not long ago was packed with monsters, there was only him and his dragon now. His dumb, gigantic dragon. You know what I'm on about. That thing you have with Tristania? Drake thought harder. It did little at first, it did little later as well. The realization only hit him when Issei hit his lightly charred part of his scales. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me. Fener told me. Fener? That four-legged traitor. Relax. I figured it by my own. You're not that sly. Dragons have little need for slyness. Drake huffed a gust of wind by his nose. It was strong enough to make Issei stumble lightly. She's a persistent lot. You should know that much. I also know you're weak to pressure. Issei replied nonchalantly, earning another blow of wind from the crimson-scaled dragon to tumble him again. Stop doing that, you dragon breath. How is she anyway? She handled her magic a bit sloppy. Powerful though, as you might have expected. Possibly more. Drake said professionally. Her flight is inefficient and her footwork could be better. She's more of darting around and prays she won't get hit. I'd teach her how, but I have dragon legs and wings. No, you're just lazy. No, those were proper excuses. The dragon defended. Surprisingly, his mighty wings and big legs and overall build weren't meant for precise flighting maneuver. She can handle herself fine, just don't expect her to fight an army. Issei grimaced confusedly at the notion. Fight an army? Why would she? Who knows? You'd expect a trihexa can at least bite off an entire army. I would, but she's not trihexa. Is a part of it she is, has a part of it. It's different. Issei couldn't deny it. He didn't like it whenever anyone mistakes Triss as trihexa. But he wouldn't go so far and upset his dumb dragon just because of that either. Life is too short to be nitpicky about everything. Boss, my wolf spotted the half-breed is walking your way. Fener's voice. No malintent whatsoever. Seems to me she's only taking a walk. Want me to do something about it? No. It's fine. I'll handle it. And the line was cut. It had been a year, and Issei had gotten used to hearing someone's voice clearly in his head, but it was still a little surprising at times. Fener? Yeah. It's nothing important. Issei nodded as he turned on his heels, facing Drake. Anyway, I was planning to train her anyway. Oh? So why didn't you? Laziness. That wasn't his true reasoning, of course, but Issei would rather keep it for himself for now. Mildly amused, Drake puffed him off his soles. The gust was powerful, so powerful, in fact, that it lifted Issei and his light leather armor he always wore in the dungeon. It made a soft thud sound over the smoothened surface of the cavern. It happened just as a person wandered into the area. The red dragon was the first to notice. What's that? Issei turned his head around, his leather pants scraping the tiny bits of rocks of the rough cavern floor as he shifted slightly. He didn't have superhuman supervision, or sharp dragon-eye eyesight either. Her face looked blurry from afar, but her ribbon was easily recognizable, as was her long swaying hair. That is one of the girls from earlier. Did you forget already, you relic? I didn't. I'm not good with remembering faces, I am. That's what old age does to you, Drake grumbled audibly. He shrugged it off, however. No use getting all pissy over a joke. What's she doing here? Issei shrugged. Sightseeing? Sightseeing? Some prisoners they are. You're making it sound as if we're forcing them to stay, aren't they? No. What do you think I am? A brute? We had a mutual agreement. Huh. I see. Just like marriage, except it isn't a lifetime of commitment. The two shared a brief laugh, just short enough that they were able to greet the newcomer properly by the time she arrived. Hello, good evening, the girl said, smiling. Drake raised his brows at that. You have a nice smile, he said, causing Issei's head to turn to give him a look. Much better than Grimger's. It's a refreshing sight. Anyone would, you idiot, Issei chastised. What kind of compliment was that? Comparing a girl's smile to yellow-toothed orc? Akino didn't mind, however. She tittered and said, thank you. That was kind of you. I never would have thought the day would come where I would be complimented by a dragon. Oh dear. Ha! Drake's voice swelled with an unhealthy amount of pride and joy. And no ordinary dragon he is, mind you. Issei had never rolled his eyes to show his annoyance, but this time he did. This is why I never praise you. No. That's because you're just mean. No, I'm not. Issei swiftly denied. I'm a nice person when I'm nice. Returning the attention to the girl, he asked, what are you planning to do coming in here? Oh. I was just sightseeing. Akino smiled, and Issei smirked at Drake as though he won a bet. I like to look around at new places. Really? Even if everywhere looks the same around here? That's not true, there are rooms I haven't been in yet. Or not allowed to. Akino shifted slightly as she took another glance of the humongous cavern. Oh my, this place seems bigger than I last remembered, perfectly suited to serve as my lair. Big dragons need big lairs. Issei paused as Drake transformed into his true size, which was double his normal size, now able to touch the ceiling if he stood on his two legs. The shadow he casted blotted out nearly half of the cavern. Oh my, you're huge. Akino was amazed, her mouth gaping as she tilted her head upwards to be able to see Drake's maw. On the other hand, Issei was annoyed, both at Drake and towards his dirty mind. That wasn't childish at all. Go shrink back, you poser, it's too dark. You'll scare the spirits. Too late, it seemed, as the lights had scattered about, darting here and there in disarray, scrambling the lighting of the cave. Issei sighed, knowing what was happening, but Akino didn't. She thought those were fireflies. That was until some orbs of light wandered down to their keeper. As it turned out, the light orbs were flocks of tiny flame-colored people with red wings emitting warm light. Much alike fireflies, but slightly taller, slimmer, and brighter glow. What is a keeper? What is it? Is it danger? Where? One of the fire spirits shrieked as she floated closer to Issei's face, voicing the worry of her people. Soon enough, the whole crowd gathered under Drake, illuminating the area but leaving the ceiling as dark as night. No, that was him being silly. Ah, it's just dragon being silly, ahahaha. Silly dragon, why be silly? She laughed, and the whole tribe laughed along, shaming Drake for being silly. Such was the carefreeness and the simplicity of the fire spirits. But they did manage to shrink Drake back to his more presentable size. Issei had learned a thing or two from these minute creatures. Akino, however, rather than learning, seemed to have taken interest instead. My, so tiny. Are they fire spirits? I've never seen them before. Tiny? Excuse me, it's you that are too big. One of the more easily taunted and prone to misunderstanding spirits exclaimed, puffing out her chest as if to appear bigger and menacing. She didn't appear bigger, nor she was any more menacing. How adorable, oh my. Akino started to feel the heat they were radiating as much of the curious spirits took a closer inspection on the new lady. A very up-close inspection. Keeper, what is this? What is this? It's a who. Issei corrected. Who? The spirit looked conflicted. Weird name. Hello, who? Why is who here? Is who lost? Issei was not a person to give up easily, but he gave up. Don't mind them. They're bright, just not in the head. Akino giggled, not minding that her personal space was invaded for once. It's fine. They're cute. Once again, his nothing matters if they're cute theory was proven. Only a matter of time until he could publish it publicly. Give or take a few years and the development of a ward of redundancy. I'm Akino. How are you? Who Akino? She tittered, nodding and going along while the only males in the vicinity decided it was best to watch. The spirits stopped their prodding, and as one flew over to Issei's face, the rest followed. Keeper? What's a Huakino? Is endangered species? Yes. The only Huakino in the world. That's horrible. They all gasped in unison. Even the brattier one looked apologetic for snapping at her. Is okay, Huakino, you safe here now? Keeper keep you safe, aha, Akino happily played along. Thank goodness. Will you keep me safe too? Ha! Nah. Not our job. We give light, Keeper and Wolfie keep you safe. Oh. And King Bones of Big Green and a Minotaur? Yeah. Rose too. And his bro. Our big bro, Wolfie? Fener? Akino looked at Issei for confirmation. He made a face and shrugged, and Akino giggled again. She wondered if Fener would ever allow her to call him Wolfie. She assumed the Big Green was Grimgar. She didn't know who King Bones was yet, but she looked forward to meeting him. Who's Rose? Toros. Drake answered. The Minotaur. The one you fought earlier. Rieger is his brother. Issei sent an exasperated glance at his oblivious dragon, who had soured the mood among the spirits. What? Our Rieger is big bro. Rieger gone now. His duty over is what Keeper said? Right, Keeper? Issei nodded. That he did. Akino noted the sudden dimming of the spirit's light, once luminous, now shimmering akin to an ember. Quickly, she pieced the pieces together, and arrived at the conclusion that she had tortured their brother. And she arrived that she was a horrible person. All right now, it's getting late. Go back up and sleep, you spirits. Late? Is it? Yes, so go on. Remember what Big Bro taught you. Late sleep bad. Bye-bye, night-night. The leader cheered, and instantly the rest joined and revitalized their glow as they flew up, bringing the lights with them and returning the illumination to the cave. And there they go. With that dealt with, he now had one last remaining issue for the day. No, it wasn't Drake's low social skills. That was an issue he had to deal with every day. It was clear to him Akino felt remorseful. Her dour face and mournful eyes gave it away. The last thing he needed was a scout with a stress disorder. They're different. Huh, the monsters here and out there, they're different. Alright, still consumed with the newfound feeling of guilt, she didn't completely understand what he was saying. I'm saying don't you ever treat those you meet outside the same way. Out there, they're exactly the mindless, remorseless creature you think they are, and it will never change. You kill them, or they'll kill you. What about those I've killed here? What about them? They're dead. You can't change that, and you didn't know. I said that earlier. You can feel guilty or not. Not many will care as long as you do what you have to do and not hinder others. Now why don't you follow the spirits and head back yourself? Or do I have to make sure you didn't get lost? Akino shook her head slowly. No. I remember the way back. Thank you, Keeper. She gave him a forced smile, and walked away with her head heavy with thoughts. As she left, Issei gave way to a sigh. What a day, indeed. Another day with unexpected events. And yet you're none the wiser. Humph. I say what's in my mind. What's wrong with that? What's on your mind is what's wrong. The keeper blithely replied. I'm leaving too. We'll have plenty to do tomorrow, I bet. Well, for me? You'll probably just stand around being insensitive. Bah, whatever. Never was bothered by his insensitiveness. Drake lied down, using his jagged arms to support his head. What have you in mind for tomorrow? Why do you speak in backward sentences? It doesn't make you any smarter. Quipped Issei, who was on his way out as well. And I don't know. Some sparring and maybe even a field trip outside. Maybe even meat for breakfast. Who knows? I'm no clairvoyant. What would come. He'd just have to deal with it as he saw fit as per usual. Oh, one last thing. Lazily, Drake peeked open his eye. What? You said her smile's a refreshing sight. Yeah, because it is. You don't think the succubi have a nice smile? Drake snorted. Ha! Their smile is different. There's always a twist behind it, be it lust or desire, a taunt, or pride from what they've done. It's in their nature, so it can't be helped. Though, I didn't expect you to pay that much attention to them. Humph. It's because they never bother hiding it. Issei chuckled. Don't you appreciate honesty? Ah, shut it. Honesty and being open are not the same. Besides, their smile isn't what you can call an honest smile. Maybe not, the keeper shrugged, continuing his walk. But that's also part of their appeal. And he certainly did not mind. It was true, however. Akino's smile certainly had different tune to it. The kind of smile he hadn't seen for nearly 2 to 3 years by now? Her image had blurred as time goes by. Her voice and laughter had faded, and he was left with traces that will continue to fade away. But maybe it was for the best as well. Nostalgia could be a cruel mistress, after all. Perhaps the only thing capable to sway him from his resolve. Break. If you're looking fair someone o'er there, give it up, missy. Less your be searchin' fair bones. My sword is yours to use for a certain price, my friend. This one, however, will cost me my dear soul. Alas, my sword is all that I can offer. Those were few of the differently worded snubs she had been hearing for the past days. Rejection and sugar-coated rejection. Cities to cities, ports to ports, taverns to taverns, it's give up. Or no can do. Or I'm too wimpy for this. With slight differences in accent the moment she mentioned the dungeon. Cowards, you have lost your mind to journey to such foul place alone, lass. Maybe because no one is man enough to stand side to side with her against the odds. It seemed the people's bravery also disappeared with the champion, not just hope. That, or her thinning pouch might be the next logical reason. She wasn't clever enough with her words to convince others to stand and fight for her for free, unfortunately. Diplomacy and charming others weren't her strongest skills, but at least she knew how to grow carrots and how to mop her old barn really well. Even then, she really could use a day without these cynical encouragements. After all she had been through, doubts seemed to never stop appearing. No one believed she could cross the narrow sea of Japan to get to the mainland, let alone travel 1,000 leagues by her own, which she did. She had to take a long way around the 3 kingdoms battling for China because they were picky to anyone who wanted entry, as well as the Mongol horde because she didn't have a death wish with the ruling horse lords over there. She had her fair share of usual highwaymen and bandits too along her way, but it was either that or became a hat for the Mongols. She had traversed the lush forests in the east that housed the Elven Principality, encountered a few dwarven merchants that went above ground to trade, before sailing over the Mediterranean Sea and making her way to the Holy Empire, Christianity's United Kingdoms, the largest empire that spanned from Poland to France, united by their concern of the unnaturals that bordered them. How long before it crumbles? She didn't know. Perhaps until they have no threats. Perhaps when an ambitious king decided to take everything for themselves. Perhaps until when the kings desired independence or others' land. It was formed not long before she set forth from her homeland, but until that day comes, no supernaturals could possess a threat to them. Of course, there was still the inner conflicts. Perhaps they would shatter themselves in the end, but that wasn't her concern. She was to head to the dungeon and go however deep she could go. Today, she had delved past the Pyrenees and had rested at an inn of a small town before continuing her way to the city of Barcelona, the capital of the Empire of Hispania. Or what used to be the Empire of Hispania. It was now imminent of completely fading away into the annals of history. Its west and southern regions had fallen, broken by the uncontrolled outbreak of monsters with reckless hate. The county of Barcelona was the last stronghold separating the mainland from the monsters. It was the reason why humanity had decided to unite. Any land beyond Barcelona was now known as the Dark Land. A no man's land. It had many other intimidating names, but it was commonly referred as Dark Land, although it was only dark during nighttime. Only scarce brave cities stood in these vile, monster-infested lands, and even braver smaller settlements scattered far in between, serving as a temporary rest area for either the brave adventurers or desperate people wanting to find one last excitement. But as the champion and many legends failed to return, many were pillaged. Cities were left as ruins, towns as mass cemeteries, and religious buildings desecrated. It tore her knowing that she might never set foot at the Cathedral of Santiago or visit the Mosque of Córdoba. Those creatures bowed down to no god and had no respect to any other living being. But it irked her more that no one had tried to stop them from spreading further. It's been a year since. It has. Didn't you say they'll send some men here? Being in a rather quiet inn, overhearing the nearby patrons a few tables away from hers was unavoidable. From what I heard, yeah? A man said, looking down on his round mug. Doubt it'll happen any time soon. Or ever. Same old, all talk. His friend scoffed. Well, here's for humanity's greatest realm. Ha! In God's will. With a mocking laughter, the two men clashed their mugs, spilling some of the amber liquid. Their topic wandered off eventually to a more disconcerting one, such as whether or not they should try out drinking 3 glasses of Alesh at once as they immersed themselves in Alesh. She couldn't blame their bitterness towards the current superpower. People tell tales, and from what she heard, Hispania was left to fend for itself, left to fall into the ruins they were now, but restoring the glory of Hispania was none of her concern. She wasn't Spanish, for one, and getting to the dungeon was currently her main goal. All the above had never stopped her, and neither would the words of a drunkard. Not when she was a week away. We don't often get a lot of Easterners around here often, HM? It was the innkeeper. Looking about in his 40s, rather rugged in appearance but gave out a friendly vibe and a voice that was lighter than she expected. His eyes were dashingly blue. Oh, how could you tell? The innkeeper's face lit up with pride. She found it rather adorable. Met my fair share of foreigners. Mostly the mainlanders. Otherwise known as the Western and Southern Europeans. Several of those desert folks. I'd call them deserters, but that'll make them sound criminal. The man with the salt and pepper hair laughed warmly. But very few of yours. And I got a mighty accurate hunch. She nodded in a friendly manner, putting on a simple smile. Fortunately, the main language was one of the few things she learned over her travel. They don't come around often anymore, do they? Well, not really, no. The innkeeper replied sadly. Some supply caravans from time to time. A group of hunters. Had you come by springtime, then you might have gotten yourself a company. They won't take you to that damned place, but some safety is always good, right? Curses. Who knew traveling a continent could take up a year? You mind if I ask why you want to go there? I have to. Well, best be careful. Not just there, but on your way too. Robbers, bandits, those nitwits like picking on stragglers. I've met a few. Hopefully I can handle a few more. Ah, right, yes, you've come this far after all. He nodded solemnly. Why would you go this far if it isn't for something very important? Yes, someone I know could be in there. She felt her lips drying for some reason. He appeared more concerned now. Many is still in there, miss. No mean to put out your fire, but whether they're still alive or not. Not this again, he's alive. She had set her mind on it. Convinced herself of it. She had gone too far to turn back around. Oh dear, such fervor. You're making me jealous here, missy. The innkeeper laughed warmly, somehow calming her down. Well, in case you meet my daughter in there, tell her to come home before it gets dark. Not a friendly time, the night is. He then turned away, his back against hers. He picked up a mug and wiped it with a ragged cloth. She noticed his blue eyes glistening for a moment, and heard a very quiet sniffle. She paused for a thought. Others had lost theirs too. Their cities, their homes, people they loved. Sons and daughters. She wondered if she really was as prepared as she thought. But what could prepare her if he was dead? Issei hiatus? Dead? No. This wasn't the time to start mulling. Gingerly, she untangled her pouch from her waist, but as she rummaged for the few remaining coins she had, the innkeeper turned around. His eyes were redder than last time. Don't worry about it. It's on the house. You can thank me later when you get back here safely. Be safe on your trip, missy. Thank you. Having paid for her food and supplies, she set to continue her journey. Stubborn, they called her, and perhaps they were right. 4 seasons had passed since the start of her journey, and autumn was nigh upon the land, but Irina Shida had never once let her hope dim. Irina plunged through the trees, her leather boots slipping and sliding against the wet earth. The slush, the wet pine needles, breath rasping in her chest, leaves lashing her arms, blood thumping in her head, pain searing all over her body. She stumbled upon an overgrown root and sprawled onto her side, nearly cutting her chest open with her own dagger she had in hand. She lay there panting, peering through the shadowy forest. Her repose lasted as brief as she expected. Hearing the mob of skittering vermin screaming and shouting as they rampaged through the forest in search of her, Irina grabbed herself up, and again she ran. She ran and ran and ran. She couldn't fight them. Not all of them at once. But she couldn't outrun them either. If this was a straight path, she would have been caught long since. Despair clouded her mind, but the basic instinct for survival pushed her limits. Her nose was full of their pungent smell, as one could expect from an overgrown rat mutated into ratman. Rocks were flying past her. Rocks the size of her fist thrown at her. The thought of getting hit by one stunned her already. Shit. Irina cursed. She never cursed, but felt this time was appropriate. She threw herself to one side, hearing the rocks thudding the tree she just passed, and continued running. Her calves were burning and her heart felt as if it was about to burst. She refused to die when she was this close. All those travels only to be mangled by a bunch of rats? A pair of beady red eyes showed themselves behind the bushes, and Irina only managed to leap away and received only a nick on her neck instead of a complete gaping gash. Nyerng, stop, run FLE! The ambusher screamed, and chased after her, before getting hit in the head by his fellow vermin's lobbed rock. It died instantly. Not running would be nice, but she preferred not dying more to even consider. She took a sharp turn when suddenly she lost the feeling of the ground below her feet. She tumbled and fell, rolled through the narrow slope and the thorns and broken branches. A tree root hit her in the head hard, making her ears ring. She rolled on and on downhill, the entire world spinning and flipping around until there was an abrupt stop as her back collided onto a bark of a tree. Nature seemed to be conspiring against her today. She winced in pain, but not too long to savor it as the vermin rushed by at the top of the slope. Where'd she go? She heard one of them ask confusedly. Man-thing skitterleap here. Irina crawled back to hide behind the tree, hiding while trying to shake the fuzz out of her at the same time. There seemed to be no stopping. She patted her dagger hilt, and drew it out, thankful she didn't lose it during the fall. At the time grateful for everything, really, but that gratefulness started to wane a little as the pain caught up to her. There was a sting on her ankles, and the leaves that hit her like lashes had left red marks on her arm and legs. She felt itchy, and dying to bathe herself, to just leap on a lake and wash everything of her. Her heartbeat was punching through her chest, and she could use some water by now. At that moment, she snickered a little to herself. Maybe the rush of adrenaline had made her slightly manic, but she snickered. Until she felt a single claw tugging her leather clothes protecting her upper arm. She turned to her left, and at the same time, the vermin turned to its right. Their eyes met. The lavenders of a human's and the beady reds of a scaven, and it was then she realized how their raggy brown furs complemented their ugly looks. Found her. Irina cut his screeches and dashed away, leaving the rat thing behind as it clutched its bleeding throat. Its friends had been alerted, however, but at least that was one less scaven chasing her. Break. Issei's morning began as usual. Wake up next to whichever succubus demanded his attention the most, frequently more than one, head to the small room to wash his face and drink the magic sterilized water from a simple faucet crammed at a small crevice of the cavern wall, rest a little while, procrastinating briefly, before eventually dressing up and outside and serve the dungeon as its keeper for yet another day. A routine he wasn't allowed to be tired of. Boss. Fener was the first to greet him. Always had been. The old wolf was among the few who stirred awake before him. Fener. Issei nodded. He led the way towards the inner cave, where Drake rested, and where the rest of the wardens would gather except for Grimger. Anything unusual happened? Nothing. It was a quiet night. The newcomers stayed in their room. No attempt to escape or any usage of magic we should be wary about. Issei smiled a bit at the wolf's tone. Is it me or you sound disappointed? Fenrir sniffed. Perhaps. They're too compliant. A little show of struggle would be appreciated. What else can they do? Struggle and die? There was enough struggle until I convinced them. Convinced? What? It's true. Convincing implies you make no use of threats. Issei shrugged. Bluffs, more like. But let's not get nitpicky about it. You mentioned something earlier about let the past live in the past just yesterday. Fener huffed, though he did see this crafty keeper's point. Still, he didn't like it that he used his own words against him. The two entered the massive cavern area. Drake was fast asleep as expected, and the fire spirits had their usual luminous glow dimmed down to make the room warmer in terms of feel. The air was chilly and fresh as if it was a grassy meadow nearby a lake where animals could graze, instead of a cave 1,000 feet below the surface. Such was the smell and the feel of concentrated essences of magic. He took a deep breath, taking in the air and feeling its flow along with his blood, rejuvenating his body. Issei exhaled loudly. Right. Wake them up. Get them to ready themselves and bring them here. We won't need the wardens for this, but get our Cheon. Whatever Issei had in mind, Fener knew it wouldn't mean well for those adventurers. Should I wake Triss? I'll worry about her. Best of luck then. Fener hummed, watching Issei walking off towards an exit as he ordered his wolves to gather the adventurers. Former adventurers. It wasn't a meager task, after all, to wake the carrier of Trihex's soul from her rest. The groups had gathered before Issei managed to convince Triss her 5 more minutes had never been just 5 minutes. Drake was still snoring. The only one who looked particularly drowsy was Triss herself, and herself alone. The others were more nervous, specifically to the fact that an 8-footed being clad in a heavy set of armor was standing in front of them, standing next to the champion. If the towering stature that dwarfed the former champion, who was already quite tall in human standard, somehow failed to intimidate them, or either did the skulls adorning his black bear pelt he wore as a mantle, then the presence, and the unworldly strength he exuded and the distorted air cloaking his massive black armor certainly did. A few of Rias' group had seen him yesterday from afar, but being this up close had them truly appreciate the terror this three-eyed being inspired. As for Kiba and Zenobia, Kiba showed a little bit of fear, but was more in awe rather than terrified, while Zenobia had been watchful of him from the time they arrived, getting antsier the more she tried to see what being lived inside that armor. After all, Archeon looked more fitting to be a servant of a dark god rather than serving alongside the champion. One thing for sure, they were glad they didn't face whatever this thing was yesterday. This, Issei gestured towards the enigmatic giant, is Archeon. He kept the introduction at that. They didn't need to know the rest yet. He'll be judging your performance today. Maybe judging wasn't the right word, more of measuring, really. Rias, though uneasy and equally uncomfortable as her peers, knew she had to at least show bravery. Measure us? Was yesterday not enough? Yesterday you fought as a group, Rias caught on. You want to measure our individual capabilities? Can't sound any simpler, right? Issei shrugged. Just swing your sword, throw some couple of spells, and that's that. A harmless spar, essentially. Hopefully. His last word made her skeptical. What of Asia? She's not specialized in any form of combat, and neither should she fight by her own. Issei eyed Asia, who shuddered a little, clutching her chest in fear. While I do think everyone should know how to defend themselves, I'll exclude her this time. Though you better train her some self-defense, or I or the others will. Training Asia? A girl who couldn't hurt a fly? That seemed harsh, despite the reality. Even if she did learn some self-defense, would she dare hurt anyone else? But at the time, Rias could only nod and say, understood. Then who are we fighting against? Yourselves, of course. Issei replied as if it was the most obvious answer. I figured you don't trust any of us from harming you yet. Should any of you get hurt, you can't blame us. Issei chuckled. Besides, we'll know who is holding themselves back so the other can look good. Rias then exchanged looks with her party, asking them for their approval. They all agreed silently with a shrug. Zenobia even seemed eager, and almost happy for this turn of event. Very well, we've no reason to refuse. Because ultimately, she had to listen to him either way. Good. Issei clasped his hands. He was the only one who wasn't dressed to fight in that room. I'll have the swordsman first, please. Fener, if you may. Right. The wolf nodded, and not long after, 2 brown-furred wolves arrived, their tail wagging. One carrying a traditional European one-handed short sword on its mouth, whilst the other one dragging Zenovia's blue great sword across the ground. It carved a thin line across the floor, something a sword should not be doing if its holder wanted to keep its sharpness. But Zenobia looked calm, knowing that the great sword wouldn't even chip even against the sturdiest of metals. Thank you? Thanks. Zenobia muttered as she and Kiba gingerly wiped the light slobber off the hilt. The wolves responded with a proud bark before they left the place, off to their scouting duties. Issei looked questioningly at Fener. You could have gotten the orcs to do it, they insisted. Fener reasoned. You ought to know orcs don't respond kindly to fetch orders. Right. The problem wasn't that they didn't do it. They do it, but not without an irritated look in their faces. This applied to all kinds of orcs. They had goblins to do trivial matters such as fetching things for them. Let's move on then. Issei stared at the two sword wielders. Go ahead and beat each other out. Kiba and Zenobia walked a fair distance away from the spectators, each of them swinging their differently sized sword as they make their way, warming up, and entered their ready stance. Neither had any intention on losing the scuffle, as friendly as it might be. On the sideline, Issei had just nudged Triss to keep her eyes open. You wanted to learn to fight behind my back, and now that you're next to me, you suddenly lose interest? HMN. Triss blinked her eyes. What? Wait, what? No, I didn't. What are you? Who are these people? And as she shifted her eyes towards the two people in a distance, who are they? How long could you stay asleep? Issei dismissed lightly as the swords rang their first tune. Just watch them and try to learn. The drowsiness disappeared as the two steels clashed, creating a soundly ring that echoed from the cavern's walls. The blonde swordsman leapt away from a certain kill swipe of Zenovia's great sword, barely attacking as all he was doing was deflect and parry. It seemed to be a one-side fight since all he could do was dodge. Don't focus on their sword or who you think is winning, focus on their movements. There are various weapons and how to handle them, but essentially it all falls to the same basics in close combat: attack and defense, supplied by movements. Techniques are basically precise movements. At first, she was amazed by how the girl easily wielded a sword of that size, how she could lift and bring it down as if it had no weight, and how quickly she could follow her attacks by using the momentum of her swing, leaving the swordsman almost no time to attack her. But what impressed her more was, none of her attacks hit, and as she noticed the boy spent so little movement compared to the girl who kept on lunging and attacking, and using his sword only to shift his opponent's sword as he moved away, Triss realized the swordsman was just as impressive, if not more. That said, how long is he going to keep dodging? In a real fight, with weapons that can kill, it only takes a hit to end it. It doesn't even need to be a vital cut. A cut to a dominant hand can end a fight. A slash on finger, on the thumb, or the armpit. A hit anywhere that will hamper the wielder's ability means the fight's more or less over. Well, he can't win if he doesn't strike back. Timing's everything, regardless of your opponent's strength. Made more important if you're outpowered. In this case, you should be able to tell he's outpowered. Issei said. He's fast, but he's without armor, which was already completely mind-bogglingly stupid from Issei's point of view, no matter Kiba's reasons were. Going into combat without armor had the same stupidity as jumping off a cliff without the ability to fly. One silly mistake, then it's off with his head or limbs. If they weren't sparring, of course. Or you can be defensive and let your opponent tire themselves out, something he's been doing effectively here. A particular thing he noticed was that Rias never flinch. Didn't even look the slightest bit worried. Either she was careless and couldn't care less, or she was that confident in her group's ability. But you don't wield a sword. You can use magic. You can even fly. You don't need to be some meters away to hurt or kill your opponent. Issei then continued, if you ever get into a fight with them, close combat fighters, keep your distance. Fights is all about making use of your advantage and not giving them any, or not letting them to use any of their advantage. Just be wary not to lose your leads, such as getting cornered, or trapped in a room with low ceiling. Can't fly much then, can you? Triss nodded thoughtfully, a bit offed at the thought of killing someone, but she appreciated that she wasn't being treated like a helpless girl anymore. Back on the fight, Zenobia had taken a break from her assault, wiping a sweat off her chin while the other hand kept hold of her seemingly mysteriously light greatsword. Kiba relaxed his stance, taking the break to inspect his sword. He had only been using it to hit the flat side of Zenovia's blade and push it away. He knew it won't do anything but chip or even shatter completely if the edges collided. Although for a cave, the surface was relatively flat, he didn't need to account for small cracks or holes that would trip him over. Quit moving, Zenobia griped. Kiba readied himself again. Swing faster. Why you? That little taunt was enough to relit her energy, apparently. Zenobia held her sword high and pulled it over her shoulder, similar to a baseball player of the future age. The woman's guard. A threatening stance issei wasn't a stranger to, but didn't see as often as it left the person exposed to low strikes. Zenobia leapt forward before Kiba could adjust his stance, and swing her sword horizontally at his head with power. Kiba ducked beneath it, stepped forward as he plunged his sword upwards, and stopped his blade as it was about to tear into Zenobia's stomach. I think it's my win. Kiba chuckled, withdrawing the tip of his sword from his opponent. Zenobia only grunted in reply and sat on the ground, lying her weapon flat on her side as her bated breathing pumped her chest. Don't sit there if you want to take a rest. Come here. Well, you heard him. Kiba offered a hand, which she took with another groan. As they made their way back, Issei spoke to them. You two from Italy? His sudden deduction came as a surprise for Rias and her peers, but less so to the two. Yeah. Kiba smiled as he stood next to his party. Zenobia was a bit too sulky at her defeat to respond. I suppose it is fairly easy to tell from our postures. Have you been there? Once. I've met a handful of people with the same teaching. 5 of them went here too. Truly? Kiba beamed as he wiped his sweat with a cloth brought by one of the succubi earlier while he was sparring. Where are they now? The slimes had probably consumed them by now. They died several floors above. Issei replied factually. No remorse or weighted by any feeling whatsoever, as if he was just describing the weather. The minotaur your party killed yesterday killed 2 of them. Oh. The smile in his face waned. Oh well, that's something I'd rather avoid then, don't we all? Issei laughed lightly. You two fought well. Could have used some mental restraints, but nothing's easily controllable in a fight, don't it? That was nothing. Zenobia said coolly, wiping the inside of her tight suit with a cloth, particularly the sweats accumulating on her chest area. Ahaha, thanks. Kiba sheepishly said. I never imagined I would be praised by the champion himself. Count me in as surprised. I surprised you? Issei laughed. Well, she surprised me. At the time, nobody understood why he nudged towards Asia, who had done nothing but watch the fight. Asia? Rias curiously said, in what way? You saw her blessings yesterday. Blessings. Miracles. Flavor word used to replace the word magic for the priestess or mages of the kingdom of heaven. He supposed it was for convenience sake. All spells are magic, but not all spells are blessings. At least that was what they would claim. To him, be it blessings, dark magic, demonic powers, blood magic, lores, red, white, gray, all could be easily categorized to attack magic, defense magic, and support magic. But perhaps that was due to him being an outsider to all things considered magical. Either way, I'm not questioning her blessings. Issei looked at both Kiba and Zenobia, the ones who were hurt the most during their encounter. I've met many healers, but I've never met one who can do what she just did, and to think these 2 were wounded yesterday. Nearly mortally, might I add. Fener pointed out, weren't they? I even forgot they got hurt in the first place. Issei added. It's like she's miracle worker or something. When both the champion and the father of wolves had their eyes on her, it was hard for Asia not to cower behind Rias and Aquino for safety. She's no ordinary healer, isn't she? Rias finally realized their intention. It was to test their abilities, just not specifically theirs collectively. Instinctively, she pulled Asia slightly closer to hide behind her and Aquino, as though this champion was a common thug wanting to rob them. I won't hurt her, I swear. Issei promised. Or we. But who is she, actually? There isn't a healer in this world I've met that can do that kind of thing. There's a limit to all healing magic, except hers was no magic, isn't it? Fener followed. It was nothing short of a miracle, no? Rias pressed her lips tightly before eventually gave in, realizing fully there really was no other options. Yes. She's the holy priestess. Huh. Fener huffed. I was hoping for more resistance before you admitted. I failed to see any point in denying. Fair enough. Fener scoffed. One merry band of all sorts of misfits, aren't you? Issei said with a laugh, look at you. A devil, a fallen angel, a Nicomata, 2 Italian swordsmen and women, and even the holy priestess herself. All bunched up in one party. There's plenty of how comes in that. But how come someone who is meant to be the servant of the Almighty God is tagging along with the devil? Rias looked over towards her healer, who had come out from her limited hiding spot. A sullen look on her eyes and face. Asia was never one to be dishonest with her emotions, or ever thought to hide it. "It's a long story," sighed Rias. "Shorten it? It's her story. It's not mine to share." "Well, you share it then," issei flippantly said to Asia, who flinched like a small animal. Rias shot him a spiteful look. "Don't you have any respect for privacy? It isn't a memory she's fond of recalling." Issei looked at Fener, who raised his brows with him altogether, equally flummoxed. "That bad?" Issei pried again. The spite had reduced to annoyance. Rias realized she might had overstepped her boundaries, made clear by the raging ember in Archaon's helm's 3 sockets, as he eyed her in silent fury. She then reminded herself that while she could give Issei and Fener a certain degree of trust, the rest of this dungeon's occupants were rather nightmarish to be trusted. To put simply, "Yes," she said, leveling her voice. "Tragic? Yes. Betrayals, I'm guessing? Yes. Are there no one in your party that doesn't have a sob story?" Silence. A particularly forlorn one among Ria's party. "We've all been through our own adversities." "Adversities, huh?" Issei hummed, nodding to himself. Nobles certainly love enhancing easily understandable words like "we had gone through shit." Nonetheless, that explained her touchiness as well as the attachment they shared with one another. Told him enough that they had been together for at least quite a long while, or they were all simply easily emotional. Did he have a dark, troubled past? Not particularly grim, Issei considered. Traumatic events? Sure. Plenty of them that they had effectively desensitized him to feel. He wasn't proud of it. No pride found in being dehumanized despite how many times he was told otherwise by hardened veterans who lost stuffs they care about. Birds of a feather indeed. Fener concluded. "What are you talking about?" But here lied someone who still had most of their innocence intact, and was still a virgin to the cruel reality brewing outside this deep dungeon. Glancing over the new faces and those she knew, the reason was different, but it was not the first time Triss had been this confused and irritated. "I don't understand a thing." "Stop being so cryptic. Is this a skill too?" "People skill, yeah. Not something you can learn instantly or learn from a book. Listen and talk to people. That's why it's named people skills." Issei shifted to look at Ria's party. The way they looked at Triss make it seemed as if they were understanding something, such as the inkling thought of the girl being Trihex's soul carrier he mentioned yesterday. Issei glanced at Rias, and then Triss, who then looked at each other. From afar they might look like sisters. "You both have the same hair color. You might be related." While Rias became perplexed, thrown off by the sudden off-topic, Triss scoffed. "There's no way." Her reaction slightly offended Rias. "My hair's darker. It has more curls to it too. I swear you can never tell when I'm joking." "Boss." "What?" Issei and practically everyone else turned their head around at Fener. "You might want to hear this. My scouts found a human heading towards here." "A human?" "Yes. Alone." Even Issei could be surprised by the sheer stupidity some people still have. "What? To hear? Has he gone mad?" "It's a she," Fener corrected. "And it can't be mistaken where she's headed. She's heading straight to this place, though it appears she's being chased by the scaven. Impressive that she's still alive, really. What do you want us to do?" Though generally weak, pathetic, disgustingly cowardly and most importantly, twitchy, the rat men or scaven were numerous in number. Them and their under-empire. Nobody knew how they first appear, or how they managed to be everywhere in the littlest nook and crannies on earth, but they were numerous. Every settlement that was raised by the horde of monsters had been colonized by these vile beady red-eyed vermin. Everyone of any races agreed they were a race of pests needing an imminent extermination, but those rats should know better than to try to colonize this dungeon. She can't outrun them forever. She won't survive. Just leave them be. "Aye, boss." Normally, there was no one to argue against him. But today, there was Rias and her decency. "What? You're leaving her to die? If she's heading here, then she should know it won't be a walk in the park." As Issei was about to move on with the current plan for the day, Fener bothered him again. "Boss, it also appears she's heading this way still. For heaven's sake, can't your wolves turn her around? Even a pack wolf won't last long against an entire throng of rats." Issei thought fast. Normal skeletons would be useless in the sun. The goblins were still recovering from yesterday's skirmish, and though Grimgr would gladly lend his elites, Issei didn't want anyone more important than mere goblins to fall by those toxic rats. Zombies were generally useless other than adding a little bit of extra scare factor, and would be insanely weak in the sun. Slimes were simply out of the question. He would never risk putting the wardens out there just for some rats either. He himself included. Fener was able to read his face and his thought, and said, "Why don't you have them rescue her? If she is injured, which is likely, they can bring her back to the nearest civilization. Should she persist on coming here, my scouts will pretend to give chase, forcing them to leave either way." "I agree. Let us go," Rias said with resolve. "Fine, fine. If it's a quest you want, then it's a quest you get. But not all of you," issei concluded. "How many are there?" Fener paused, waiting for his wolf's response. "At least 20 that are chasing her. More nearby beyond doubt." "All right then." Issei cast the teleportation circle as he spoke. "All of you can go except the clerk and the blonde sortie. Those two stays here." "Very well." Having no time to ask why Kiba as well, Rias coolly nodded as she and the rest of her party stepped into the shining white circle. "We won't be long." They vanished in an instant. "We won't be long, how pompous," issei snickered. "Have another track if they're staying in group. One each if they're spread out. Those rats like to pick them off one by one." Fener nodded. Weak and prone to backstabbing their own people as they may be, scavens were not without cunning. With that handled, issei shifted back towards the remaining people. "You can go, Archeon. Sorry for wasting your time." Without uttering a word, the giant armored entity left the cavern, leaving trails of ominous black smoke in his path. What an absolute unit he is, issei thought out loud. Not rarely he wondered if the three-eyed king regained his sanity and his ambitions to bring the end time. Which part of today's world would he conquer first, or destroy first? But now the ever-chosen of chaos was just a mere walking armor, with only the safety of the dungeon and following the orders of the keeper remained instilled in his mind. Great Red's curse could be rather terrifying. If issei failed that day, he might be walking along Archeon, clad in his blood-red dragon armor, moving as a husk of his former self without any thoughts or needs. "Have you come to face him in battle, champion?" asked Kiba. "Never have, and don't call me champion. I have a name I intend to use," the champion replied with a huff, crossing his arms. "I was in the other party." He wiped the other party out. "I'd be dead if I had to face both him and Great Red at the same time." Kiba went quiet for a while, perhaps giving a moment of silence for Great Red. "Was it really him? The Great Red, I mean." "Yep," issei hummed as he noticed a certain someone looking sullen. "Oh, look at her. She's sad now," Triss scowled. Yet before she could express her ire, Kiba spoke first. "But why? Why, what? Weren't you and the others sent to kill Trihexa?" "Yes, we did, and fooled we got. I didn't know how Trihexa looked like. How was I supposed to know he wasn't a big red dragon? How many tales have you heard that antagonize dragons?" Confusion hadn't yet to left the blonde swordsman. "Did nobody know?" "No idea either. And the more I try to figure it out, the more I suspect every single faction. Which one believed that was Trihexa? Which one knew and made a fool out of the champion? Your guess is just as good. What I know, though, is that I have to keep this place safe and her too. That's what Great Red told me, and I suggest you do the same too, since I'm sure either of us want this world to end yet. At least not until he lie dead." Fener gave the keeper a quizzical look, but kept his question in his head for the time being. "All right," Kiba sheepishly agreed. "But does that mean heaven also tricked you?" The question worried Asia greatly. A girl with great faith, this one was, issei believed. "I told you. I don't know who did what. Could be those suspicious vampire counts. Could be those horny Vikings. It might even be the very holy and righteous kingdom of heaven. All I know is that only those who lives in this place I can trust. And his parents, but he felt adding them was unneeded. Well, excluding you and your party, but trust takes time to build, right?" Kiba nodded. The swordsman had been agreeable so far. Trusting him with this knowledge should do him well in convincing the rest of Ria's group. "Good man." Issei nodded as well. "Now then, I'd like you to have a spar with her." He nudged at Triss, who was both excited and nervous that her time had come for an actual fight. "I will do my best. I don't try too hard. Try not to kill each other too. Control yourselves, and I mean you as well, Triss." Issei doubted Rias would be pleased if she returned only to find a gaping hole in her minion's chest. "And you can't use a real sword for obvious reasons. Fenrir, have a goblin fetch a wooden sword here. Very well. Fenrir knew goblins had no wooden sword. At best, it would be a stick they carry here, and as one puny green goblin rushed inside the giant cavern, no doubt Grimgir's lowest of lackeys, it was a stick one carried indeed. Ha! I knew they'd bring an actual stick. Ha ha ha! It was clear only Issei and him alone enjoyed the simplicity of a goblin's mind, while both Triss and her soon-to-be sparring partner were equally disheartened. I am not fighting a swordsman who wields a mere stick. He's a swordsman. He wields swords, not tree branches, Issei shrugged. Sometimes it might be all he has. Maybe he lost his sword and such. Kiba was slightly offended. Him? Lose his sword? Blasphemy. I'd rather not fight with one either. No matter what knowledge in swords I have, I don't think any of it will be of value. If you don't mind, I'll cast my own wooden sword. Issei raised his eyebrows. Oh, as the ground below Kiba's feet shone with magical light, raising the hilt of what appeared to be a wooden replica of a European short sword, Issei learned that this swordsman had other talent. And a rare one at that. So he had the holy priestess as well as a sword birth caster, which would make him a sword birther. That aside, what surprise recruitments this merry band had brought him. All he had to do was play his hands right. He had no uses for them for now, but in the future, should he ever had to abandon the dungeon for whatever reasons, having them as backup certainly would be a better choice than roaming around with a horde of monsters. Well then, go ahead, break. Rias glanced towards the mouth of the dungeons. The implanted head on a stake was still there, left to rot, left for the maggots to consume. She didn't think it was enough as a warning to what lied inside, now that she had actually went there. She shrugged the thought away. As she and her peers stepped outside, her eyes didn't need to adjust much as the sunlight was hidden by the forest's canopy. I didn't expect to make it out of there this soon. A softly spoken jest. Kaniko's, definitely, Rias chuckled. Indeed, the thought of leaving the dungeon complete didn't cross her mind. Kiba and Asia weren't with them yet, but for now, escaping wasn't her priority. There was a life they could save, and after yesterday's failure, she was certain a successful rescue would boost her party's morale. It might also all that she needed to cheer herself. And perhaps her best friend as well. Akino? Are you alright? You haven't spoken much since this morning. HM? Oh, I'm fine. Akino replied with her usual smile. I'm still a little bit drowsy. Before Rias could reply, a voice cut her. The girl is about 100 meters away, northeast. A familiar, smooth yet powerful voice rang in her head. As she looked around, she noted Fenrir communicated with all of her party members at the same time. An impressive skill, but for the father of wolves, it must meant nothing. You best make haste. She had just fallen into a slope. You heard what he said. She addressed her party. Let's go. We've a life to save. It was a rare breakfast for the keeper of the dungeon that day. Normally he would be the one eating alone while the succubi sat around him, chatting and keeping him entertained, refilling his cups and most of the times making a sex-related joke or verbally fight for a round bouncing on his lap to fulfill their demoness need. Triss didn't like to stay for that reason. She did this time, however, satisfied with her training, and overall curious at these new faces. Demons didn't need to eat. Other guardians weren't with him either due to their massive size and appetite, or they didn't need to eat. For example, Osterion, the Skeleton King and his army of skeletons. Those bones didn't have stomach to eat. Fine wine would just simmer through his ribcage, but so far, the others hadn't touched their meals. It was quite heavy for a breakfast, but considering their little training session, their stomachs should be emptied after that. Why were you two not touching your food? Rainer asked, keeping her tone civil despite being annoyed. Issei never refused her cooked meals. Are they bad? They're nervous, Rainer. Issei answered. Their friends are out there being heroes. Of course they're nervous. Even though they'll be fine? It's not like you leave them unsupervised or anything. Don't be too worried about them. Issei continued, explaining what the succubus was implying. They're not alone. Fenrir has his wolves tracking them as they pound the rats into oblivion. A ray of relief at last. Kiba and Asia's face lit up like the fire spirits. Why you do? Hey! I can't have people I just recently recruited die on their first day. That'd make a bad publicity. Behind Kiba's sheepish laughter, the blonde knight could tell the champion wasn't as heartless as Rias had said to him. There were still some good intentions behind that dour, sour, bitter, hardened face of his. Hey, night person. Triss awkwardly began, stammering a bit, adorably shy now that she wasn't running or fighting back. I'm sorry for breaking your sword. Oh. Please don't mind it, it's only a wooden sword and I can always create more. To make his point, the ground birthed another sword, the European bastard sword. You don't have to feel sorry about it, but I appreciate your apology, Lady Triss. Other girls might swoon because Kiba was quite handsome and charming. Not Triss. Ugh, please don't call me a lady, everyone calls me that when I'm not. Well, how do you want to be referred to? What's wrong with just Triss? The scarlet-haired girl asked, playing with her gorgeous wavy hair. Justice? Issei quipped. Just. Triss. Trihex's soul-bearer petulantly hit his arm, not doing much damage. As Kiba laughed along, Asia nervously glanced at her new surroundings. The dark caverns frightened her very much so, and the fact that big and scarier monsters were never 20 feet apart from her didn't ease her anxiety. However, she was more anxious of her party's conditions. Will they be all right? She gasped and put her hands over her mouth once she realized she just said it out loud. Why won't they? Triss replied with almost a yawn, unbothered, like Issei was. What's a couple dozens of rats to a bunch of trained adventurers? Even you can squash a rat. Just hit them in the head with a staff. The idea alone caused Asia to shiver. And no, I don't think I can. They're scavens, Triss. Issei huffed, tugging her horn, making her shriek. They're rat men. Rats the size of a man. They're not mere sewer rat. And how's that any different? Triss yanked away his hand off her horn, upset. A rat is still a rat, no matter the size. You keep that kind of mentality in your head, and you'll one day find yourself surrounded by a horde of them. Issei nonchalantly replied a warning. But if you think swarming you is their only strategies, you're dead wrong, and you'll be dead too. This'll be interesting, Rainier whispered under her breath, scooting closer towards him as she found his stories to be fascinating. Kiba leaned forward too, feeling the heat of his cooked meal grazing his chin, while Asia had her heart clenched. Their numbers and cunningness are two things you should worry about. They have magic, plague, warp, stealth. Their own mutated monsters. The things they call as rat ogres and hell-pit abominations. But it's their so-called weapon teams you should be deathly worried about. Issei's expression went grim. Magic takes time to chant. A vortex spell takes time to deal their damage. But it takes less than a second to lob a globe of poison winds, or fire a jezzel, or let loose of a hail of warp-infused bullets from their rattling guns. Kiba gulped. They're globadiers, isn't it? I was told their globes melt flesh. I've seen them melt flesh. Issei rectified. You'd think that humanity is the most inventive of the races, but no. It's those rats. Humans have always been better at inventing new ways to murder, but these scaven weren't far off. Whatever they have in that glass globes can turn common armor into frail rusted armor if hit directly. If that didn't hit your flesh, you'd still have the gases released from the globe. Breathing it will corrode your lungs slowly, and you'll feel like you're being clawed apart from the inside, until you die, choking on your own blood. Asia felt suffocated all of a sudden, though she was hardened enough to not puke her meals. She had seen a fair share of horrors, but evidently, it was nothing compared to what he had seen. EW. Triss simply reacted, that's disgusting. Uh-huh. Issei casually said, indifferent to his tale. I saw it happening directly. Some knight thought a minor blessing would protect his lungs. Didn't protect his eyes, it didn't. Those gases melted them like a candle. Seeing Asia whimper audibly made him smirk, something that Rainier noticed. Oh, master, you big bully. Yeah. Well. He didn't admit it, though he wasn't denying it either. You don't need to worry about those things hurting your friends. They're the elite force of the Skaven. They won't have them out in the surface unless they're that desperate for food. After taking a last bite, ripping out the meat out of his chicken, Issei added a small quip, which they might. They wouldn't. The Skaven would eat their Skaven slaves first and starve, and there were plenty enough Skaven slaves for every clan rats, a Skaven term for peasants. But it was worth lying just to see these two people's face churn with panic. Break. As Rias and her rescue group trudged through the lush forest, she realized that navigating the thick woods was much easier when she had an all-seeing eye watching over her, guiding her where to go and where not to go. And having someone told you how close you were getting seemed to make the travel felt shorter in a way. Less than 50 meters now. You should catch their noises soon. There's a pack of them. I'll see if my wolves can't pry on one or two stragglers. You're on your own now, lass. With a nod, more to herself than to respond to Fener, Rias then turned to her own tracker. There's almost 20 of them. Kaneko looked disgruntled for some reason, but as Rias saw her pinching her nose and make a face, she could understand why. For once, she was glad that being a devil only enhanced her sights in the dark. As the group continued to make their way, Akino raised a question. Have you read of them, Rias? These scavens? They're a violent and selfish race prone to stab themselves in the back. Rias plainly replied. They can never be trusted, and they worship their own god. It's the horned rat, I think. Not much is known about them, even in the books, Akino hummed. For a band of overgrown rats turned men, or vice versa, they seem awfully mysterious. That's the thing about them. Most books I read seem to spread a propaganda of their inexistence, as if they refuse to admit their presence in this world for some reason. My guess is to stop panic from spreading. I doubt people would be able to live calmly on the surface if they know there's an intercontinental underground network of caves or perhaps cities. There that many? Kaneko muttered, sounding surprised for once. Unfortunately. Rias huffed. They're known to be cowardly, but their cowardice give birth to cunningness. Don't lower your guard even if they're dead. I've never faced them before. All the more reason to exterminate them. Zenobia said, bloodthirsty. I think I can hear them in the distance, not just here, see? With their own very eyes, they watched as they saw the leaves began to move, parting as a human female emerged through it, face and leather armor covered in blood, running through the dense forest about 20 meters away from their position. Soon after, a crowd of the aforementioned vermin ripped through the same pile of leaves, clawing their way as they ran on their feet and claws. Rias funneled the mana she needed from the abundant winds of magic into the palms of her hand, creating a malevolent sphere of dark energy. Demonic magic, specifically the more destructive kind, and unleashed it towards the skittering vermins. Trees and shrubberies were obliterated as the black and red energy pulverized everything in its path, including the 3 scavens that had now been turned to a pile of burned ashes. The violent ripping of the flesh alarmed the rest as well as the girl, as the scavens let out a shriek-like roar as they split themselves to chase after her group. Murder, kill, man-things! One of the bipedal rats shouted, as Rias' group prepared for the incoming pack, forming a semicircle to watch each other's back. Another shouted, and no furs all die now, followed with another. Man flesh taste good. 20. Kaneko said briefly, clenching her fists, cladding them in vivid white aura. Oh, this is gonna get ugly, Zenobia remarked with a fervent smirk, always raring to go. Akino said nothing as she was incantating her elemental magic. Tiny blue sparks of electricity gathered around her priestess robe, creating a barrier made of thunder. Rias crouched down, the edge of her robe brushing the dirt below as she pressed both her palms to the ground, creating a magic circle that covered the area where her party stood. As the Skaven's nasally war cry ripped through the air, the skirmish begun. Using their numbers, the vicious ratmen circled the band of trained adventurers, potential human flesh and leather for all they cared, hissing and chittering at Rias' group. A Skaven squeaked as Akino's thunder blasted him away, and another dropped to the soggy dirt as he was beheaded, another from a shot of Rias' demonic magic. Few casualties didn't get to them. The Skavens attacked in blind rage and high on adrenaline, leaping and pouncing towards the adventurers with their rusty daggers in hand. The group stayed in the glowing crimson magic sigil Rias had created earlier, as the Gremry knelt down and pressed her palms to the earth again. Pillars of pure destruction emerged from the ground surrounding them, destroying every Skaven in a 1-meter radius from the magic circle. 6 down, 14 to go. A certain musk started to linger in the air, something that Rias' group disregarded as the stench from these filthy ratmen. Which wasn't far off, as it was the musk of fear the Skavens exude at the slightest feeling of terror. If they were running low on number, they would run. But they weren't. As the pillars died down, the Skaven assaulted anew. Kaneko and Zenobia then stepped out of the magic circle to introduce these rat men to their fist and sword. Kaneko wished she had something to plug up her nostrils as she weaved through a couple of slashes, then landing a punch to a Skaven's furry throat, breaking his bones, causing him to squeak as it choked to death. Some of the Skavens leapt away from Zenovia's swing, but they didn't expect her to quickly follow through with another horizontal swing, cleaving through their body like steel through butter. Bloody entrails flew into the air, followed with a disgusting splat that only deterred the Skavens, but filled the swordswoman with a cathartic satisfaction she couldn't find from anything else. As another pounced on her, claws outstretched on one hand and a dagger on the other, Zenobia turned and lifted her sword, slicing the scaven clean as he was in midair. A kill she would soon regret as a spatter of ratman gore splashed over her battlesuit. Akino smiled quaintly, standing with almost no intent of defending herself, as her charged shield took care of it for her. Bolts of blue thunder ripped through the air as it ripped through the scaven's chest, frying it from the inside, before jumping to another victim. While she didn't appreciate the scent of burnt fur, Akino did appreciate their shriek of agony. Music to her ears, no matter how ugly. Should we run? Flee? A panicked scaven yelped, coated with thick musk of fear as he witnessed his fellow clan rats being killed. After seeing another being blasted to the sky, he made up his mind. Yes, live to fight another day. As he escaped the slaughter, the chain reaction started. As one flee, two followed. As two fled, four followed. Eventually, Ria's party was only surrounded by mounds of ashes and a pile of dead scavens. Some blood and torn limbs here and there, and as she took off her trademark black sorceress hat, Rias found that it had blood on it. Nothing a quick magic and a little bit of soap couldn't clean, so she put it back on as she addressed her group. Is everyone okay? If yes, we're going for the girl. She couldn't be far off. I'm good. Zenobia responded as she wiped the blood off her blade, using the dead scaven's fur as makeshift wipe. I have their spit on my face, Kaneko muttered in mild annoyance as she used her sleeve to swab her cheek. But I'm okay. Akino? Rias was about to ask, but upon seeing her friend was blissfully electrocuting a not-so-dead scaven to death, she took that as an answer, almost feeling sorry for the unfortunate cretin. Maybe it was her who thought too much of Akino's unusual quietness earlier. Well then, let's move. Break. Luck finally shined down on her as it seemed most of her chasers had been drawn to a group of nearby adventurers. But luck didn't seem to stay for long as Irina once again plunged through the trees. One of those damned rat mutants had tackled from behind, and now they were plunging down a hill next to a nearby stream. Jagged rocks scraped her leather armor, and the ratman made a squeak each time his head bashed into something. Some way down the slope, the scaven let go off her as they continued to fall, rolling. The world spun, and Irina saw flashes of gray rock, green moss, patches of dirt, all tumbling around her. And Irina grunted weakly as she finally stopped, staggering to get back up on her feet. Staggering to remain alive, using her knees as support. Her legs were badly hurt, possibly inflamed from all those running. She felt a sharp pain ebbing under her leather armor, and another on her head. She saw blood on the edge of her nose, likely hers as she got hit by a stray branch while running previously. Mira! Now you die! The scaven bellowed as it sprang towards her, sending her back to the wet ground underneath. Irina cried in pain as she felt the rocks hitting her back like a charging bull, but kept enough focus to try to push away the ratman on top of her. You! Stinking rat! She cursed, shouting as she pushed his damp furry shoulder. The scaven snapped its snout at her, clamping his jagged teeth as he made snarling noises from his throat. Her hands trembled as the ratman pushed his entire weight against her, wickedly snarling and chittering intelligible words. His fangs grew dangerously close to her neck, and Irina tried to place her neck as far away from his jaw. AR dash! She cried as she felt a row of yellow fangs chewed through her leather padding, tearing it before sinking itself deep into her right shoulder. She pushed him away, now seeing his red teeth, and droplets of drools mixed with her blood dripping over her cheek. She felt how warm and wet it was. How disgusting it was. Irina felt the strength of her right hand fading fast, and immediately thought to grab a hold of something. Anything that could help her keep her shoulder intact. Her left hand scrambled to the ground, found a hard rock, and bashed it to the side of his skull as hard as she could. The creature whimpered as it slipped off her, clutching its bleeding forehead, muttering more intelligible curses, twitching erratically. Hey, let's just call it a draw, will ya? She proposed, holding her own wound. No. The vermin chittered, grabbing its own rock and pummeled it to the ground. You hit me. Now you die. Those were the last words she heard from the scaven as a brown wolf shredded its throat with terrifying ease. It came out of nowhere, and as Irina stumbled backward, clumsily falling to her rear, she watched in horror as the wolf ripped the rat apart. You've gotta be kidding me. Being twice its size, and also twice her size, Irina now knew if there was an end to her journey, mauled by a brown wolf wouldn't as tragic as being chewed by rats. Her left palm left her right shoulder as it clambered to her dagger sheath, and found nothing but air in replace of its handle. Then she remembered she had it stuck on one of those vermin's eye. She gulped. The rock should do. As best as a rock could do for a weapon, the wolf, having dealt with the rat, now turned its attention towards her, approaching her with its own set of bloody teeth and gnarly snarls. Her heart pounded, but her limbs were starting to feel weaker and weaker. The adrenaline was there, but the pain was starting to overwhelm it. She suddenly lost the strength to lift the rock and let it roll beside her. This was it, she thought. There was no way she could get herself out from this situation. No strength either. She found no hope for the first time. A year's journey must come to a tragic end. She hung her head, closed her eyes, and imaged his face. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he was waiting for her. Maybe this journey wasn't really for nothing. Ha! But the moment their faces flashed before her, Irina found her lost resolve and, with the last of her energy, picked up the round gray rock and lifted herself up, ready to pounce on the wolf, only to find no wolves were there. Confused, but still alerted, Irina glanced around the river stream, back to the top of the gorge where the scaven had tackled her towards, scanning the trees and leaves and shrubs for movements. There was one, and a being emerged, clad in dark outfit with long flowing crimson hair. She thought she might be one of those adventurers that helped her earlier, but she didn't take a look long enough to know what they looked like. For all she knew, this woman might be a witch. There you are! The supposed witch exclaimed. Irina stepped closer to the edge of the small river after she saw a pair of black wings growing from the witch's back. Those were bat wings, she noticed. That witch wasn't just any witch. She was a devil. That was worse than a simple witch, but the surprise didn't end there. One after the other, a human-like being emerged from the greeneries. One had feathery black wings as she followed the devil. The other one was small, almost like a kid, but Irina had seen enough of petite people who was actually older than they looked to judge, especially as she saw her scale down the gorge with ease, cleverly making use of branches and flat surfaces to make her way down. And then another came to the view. This one had a giant blue sword that looked like it was as tall as her. She didn't sprout any wings or scale down the small ravine, and instead stayed there, with an annoyed look. Oh haha. Very funny guys. Let's ditch the normal human who doesn't have wings up there. Your sword looks big enough for a wing. The tiny girl muttered, continuing to scale down the gorge, leaving the swordswoman behind. Irina's hostility towards them considerably lowered after hearing that, and she allowed herself to rest her legs. She tried to sit down slowly, but ended up almost falling to the wet ground. The cool water splashed over her, and she felt a moment of a much-needed relief. As the new group made their way towards her, Irina unfastened her shoulder guard, careful not to move her right hand much as she pried it away. The wounds weren't that deep, thanks to the leather. Maybe punctured her flesh for barely a centimeter. But it hurt like hell. Irina groaned as she rubbed the river's water against it, muffling her desire to scream. Rias finally arrived. Are you okay? She asked, genuinely concerned as she seemed to search her hips for something, before realizing something that made her stop. She forgot she had to leave her satchel of potions in the dungeon, including her healer. That doesn't look so good. Aquino muttered, observant as always. Would you mind if I? They seemed like decent people. Irina nodded as a reply. A bit tired for normal conversations. A bit woozy and a little bit feverish. Aquino then knelt beside her, inspecting her wounds, not caring that she got her red skirt damp with the river's streaming water. The bite wound on the girl's shoulder took priority first. It'll heal, but it's better to disinfect it first. Who knew what those slobbery rats had as diets? As for the others, are there any others? Still panting, Irina nodded as she pointed at her left foot. That was the part of her body where she felt most wrong after her right shoulder. After that would be her chest, but that was likely due to her extended chase sequence. Aquino briefly unfastened her boots, slipping it off her feet, and then gasping almost immediately. Red and blue. Her muscles were badly inflamed, and if not for the adrenaline rush, Irina wouldn't be able to run that long. She won't make it to the village, will she? Fener's voice resounded in Rias' mind as she observed. We'll have to carry her. Rias replied, but sounding unwilling. She has all sorts of injuries. I think it's better to bring her to the dungeon. It being the closest safe haven I know. Fener didn't respond right away, but Rias had a feeling that the Father of Wolves was having a discussion with the boss of the Father of Wolves. That's unfortunate, but it is how it is. Leave her be. Rias almost screamed outward. What? It's the keeper's order, Fener said calmly, fully supportive of issei's decision. You're free to bring her to the village if you want to, but she's not to set a foot inside this place. Are you insane? That's at least half a day walk on foot. It'll be too late then if her shoulder is infected. Just to make sure, I am not imagining this, right? Aquino giggled. No. I'm afraid you're not. She made Irina hiss as she kneaded her ankle gently. Oh, this isn't good. You'll need to rest a few days for it to heal. Ha, it's better than having no leg. Or shoulders. Irina huffed. You girls have no idea how glad I am to see some friendly faces instead of more monsters. The girl said, her voice coarse. It reminded her to take a scoop of water from the river around her. I was sure I was going to die. Seeing her eyes and soft smile, Rias gritted her teeth. Yeah. And you're not dying here. Aquino, you and I will have to carry her to that hill. And then Zenobia can carry her all the way back. Got it. Whoa, wait, it's fine. No, you're not. Rias said factually. Lass, don't you do it, Dash. She's alive. What else do you expect? Rias seethed as she and Aquino expanded their wings. Kaneko waited as she covered their escape. You know he won't like this. He can like what he wants. I'm not letting someone die. Fenrir didn't respond any more after that, but Rias didn't care. This girl had gone through enough, and she refused to abandon her for whatever the reason might be. We're bringing you to somewhere safer. You don't know if those rats are going to be back. We're adventurers, don't worry. Irina stopped worrying as soon as Rias materialized a gold card, filled with her picture, name, and other basic infos. A standard ID card for every adventurer. Rias Gremry, huh? Irina smiled weakly, feeling her consciousness slipping away but persistent to cling onto it as long as she could. I'm Shidu Irina. Well, Irina's Shidu, I suppose, since I'm here. Break. What do you want to have us do now, boss? Guiltily, Fenrir asked with a lowered head. He was the one to suggest the group to rescue this stranger after all. Issei had his hands on his face, sitting on a broken red stalactite that was polished flat, a visible reason why Fenrir was mildly scared. Let's see, she's not a great fighter. She struggles against one clan rat. She doesn't look recognizable. She doesn't look local. And she's wounded and would possibly need some days to rest until she could walk on her own. Fenrir hunched over as he wilted his blue-gray ears. Issei sighed. It's fine. It's manageable. He shifted. Let them camp out at the entrance. Deep enough so that they won't attract any stragglers. No, wait. We can't have that. Wolves hunt. And wolves had to cross the first level to get outside the dungeon. We can't have them camp outside either. Come nightfall, they're going to be the ones needing rescue. Those damn dark spawns. Hell spawns, dark spawns, monsters. They were all the same to him. Issei thought for a little longer. Thought of it harder. Hit the dead end harder. God damn it. What's up with him? Some distance away, sitting nearby a giant red dragon, Triss was being nosy and curious as always, and being a general nuisance to Drake, who was trying to sleep. Hey! Don't sleep on me, bugger off. There's nothing better to do. There's always something better to do, you languid dragon, Triss peeved, kicking Drake on the nose. She was replied with a gust of wind through his dragonic nostrils. She stumbled, nearly falling, but regained her balance. Stop doing that, then stop bothering me. She's what? Almost never in her lifetime that she heard her guardian raised his voice in shock that way, or even appeared to be shocked at anything. That piqued her curiosity in an instant, the same way it did to his own partner. But Drake had long decided that he was going to have his second afternoon nap, and that was what he was going to do. Ditching the lazy dragon, Triss flew her way to join the keeper and the wolf, her scarlet eyes almost gleaming. What's happening? Whoa, are you alright? Issei did not, for a fact, look alright. He wasn't alright either in many cases. But this one had him almost losing his nerve of steel. No. He said, no, that's worse. I can't have her here. Triss glanced at Fenrir, hoping for an explanation. The girl they rescued. Fenrir said he knows her. Quite fondly as well, as it appears. She blinked. Isn't that good? Doesn't that mean she's the first person that knows you personally? That's exactly why this isn't good. Issei snapped, but keeping his tone from being too aggressive. Go back to Drake, Triss. I need to talk with him. But he's sleeping. Triss pouted. Why do you always have to send me away when it's about something important, Triss? Please, ugh, fine. Triss turned around on her heel and stomped her feet as she walked back to Drake, crossing her hands, and then kicked the dragon on his shoulder. Drake didn't budge. I do agree with her, however. Fener voiced his opinion, regaining confidence that he might have taken a part in saving the keeper's friend. Why is it bad that you know her personally? Issei stared at him dead in the eyes, almost turning his blood cold at the intensity and slight depravity of his glare. Because, Fener, she was a part of me. The old me. The me that I dumped away because I know I have a new commitment. This here is my life. I shouldn't go back to anything that isn't part of it, anything that may mess up my decisions. How do you think I've spent 2 years being all cooped up in this place? Fener didn't answer. A little bit scared, if he was to be honest. Just a little bit. And it was already a little bit more than he liked to admit, because I tricked myself that everyone I know are dead. Gone. Issei said harshly. That there's absolutely nothing out there that's worth of my time. Attachments I know I can't let go otherwise if I didn't do that to myself. He ran a hand through his thick brown hair. I don't know what she's doing being here, for heaven's sake. See, I'm having questions already. He fumed. But I just know if I see her, I don't know if I can stand having to do it all over again. Do what? Choosing the world instead of her. Issei said guiltily. I've done it once. That was a year ago. I know I will make the same choice even now, Fener. Thing is, I don't know how I'm going to live with it. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the DanzyDanz for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.